that it's very simple. It's more of a tech thing. Hi, everyone. Good evening. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden,
This is Hiram Makinik.
and this is Orthodox Apologetics Live. Today is going to be a little bit of a different episode today because we are doing a whole bunch of things. Basically, as you can see, the title of this is Can't Zuck This, and that's because of what happened recently with Facebook. I'm going to just shut off the sound notifications here for just a second because I'm getting sound notifications from the new NFTU community that we're doing right now. And so I'm going to maybe do a little bit of screen sharing just to give you an idea of what is going on. Because a lot of people are going, what's going on here? Like, well, we made announcements today that basically we were going to kind of like de-escalate our Facebook presence and what's it called? Then basically it's going to be something that can you guys hear us? Because if you can't, let me know. But in any case, what we're doing is we're kind of moving in the direction of decentralization. And I'm going to explain what I mean. Father, maybe you can tell us a little bit about because your experience, if you remember the Facebook outage that took place a couple of days ago.
Oh yeah, was it 3 days ago?
Yeah, three. I think it was 3 days ago, 3 or 4 days ago. Yeah.
There was an experience in which people were trying to post things, or post comments, and nothing would go through. So, I mean, I actually thought I was being. I was a little paranoid. I thought actually maybe something I had written, Facebook was kind of censoring.
No, I thought that too. I mean,
because they've done that to me before, and I'm sure a lot of people have had that done to them. So it gets kind of annoying.
I know.
So that when there actually is a technical problem with Facebook, the automatic assumption a lot of us has is, oh, they're censoring us.
Yeah, and in one case, I remember with one of the Orthodox Apologetics groups, the guy was talking to some. He was talking politely to some Muslims who decided to mass report him, and then he just was depersoned. Like there was not like you're banned temporarily or anything. He just didn't exist anymore. So the point is that when this happened, and for those wondering what actually did happen, I'm just going to put the news up on my screen because I can do that, and. So basically, there was a Facebook outage that took place, and that was about 5 days ago. It took out Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. So by the way, all of those are owned by Facebook. So if you are on one of those and you think, oh well, that's not going to happen to me because I'm not on Facebook, well, surprise, it will. Because Facebook owns these services and forces interoperability between them. This isn't a typical Orthodox Apologetics show. We will take questions on Orthodoxy, not a problem. But we do want to stress, because what we've been doing over the past couple of days is we've been trying to build a few different things, I guess you could say, to keep from the possibility of us being wiped off the internet. So we've been downloading our YouTube videos, and one of the things that we're particularly proud of, and I thank Diakonisa Xenia for this. We've been really working hard on this, especially since she's been working so hard on this NFTU's online Orthodox community. We're not, it basically the idea is that we're trying to keep a lot of the features that keep people happy on Facebook, while at the same time creating a community that's for Orthodox people, so they don't have to live with fear of retribution of what some people in Silicon Valley think we're going to, think we should or should not say. There are a couple of other good ones. I know that Scooter, who's in the chat, recently created orthochat.org. So if you get a chance, you want to go to orthochat.org. I had a spam issue with it, but I think that's just my weird IP. But again, orthochat.org is another one. And the idea is what we're trying to do is move away. I don't know what the guys from God Save the Sword do. I assume they just want to create a nice discussion for them. But the idea is moving away from centralized internet authority is probably the smartest thing you could do at this point, only because of the fact that it's not a good idea to get trapped, I guess you could say, in one box. One of the things that I was talking to Father Enoch about just now, actually, and I'm going to show it to you. Now, I don't know if this is a problem with Blabber I am, but give me 1 second. What I'm going to do is I'm going
Yeah,
to look
someone
up.
said, someone recommended Blabber I am, but I mean, I tried to sign up for it. I was getting an error trying
Well,
to
I'm
use
going
it.
to show you. Hold on. I'm going to show you something really cool, Father. Blabber I am is pretty popular right now because it's a newer server. It is secure. It's in Germany. But if you go to xmpp.org, and this is where I'm going to just put this on the screen here real quick. Um, Basically, XMPP is an open protocol. And what that means is that if you choose to go through any of the XMPP servers that are working, such as any of these that these are what XMPP servers, um, and basically, if you go through a few different ones, these are the servers. No, I want to get to clients. Yeah, okay. So you can see these are desktop clients. Um, Let me see if I can find the list of public XMPP servers. The point is that this was actually the technology that was used in chat and has been updated since. There are secure XMPP servers, list of public XMPP servers. Okay, let me make sure that's appearing here. You can see that if you go to list.jabber.at, there's literally hundreds of them, thousands.
Someone's asking what exactly is Blabber.im, Father Joseph?
It is what's known as an XMPP server. If you take
Okay.
a look, blabber.im is listed among all of these. If you go to list.jabber.at, any of these will allow you to create, depending on their individual rules, because each one is like their own private company or their own institution. You sign in, you make your name, you can work with any other XMPP server with your username and password. And so if I go here, this is like my useful little, this is actually BlabberIM's web interface. So you can use that and you can reach out to people and you don't have to use Messenger. This is kind of an important thing. I mean, even just this was a random mishap that happened, I think, today. Um, Literally, they lost, I think it was like terabytes of data. They lost like 12 years worth of music on MySpace just due to an error, just gone down the memory hole.
Now, God Save the Tsar has a question I think we should answer. He says,
Sure.
one of the issues, he says, Father, one of the issues I have with Orthodox spaces is often they're invaded by heterodox. Do you plan to allow heterodox NFTO community? Not trying to be a wimp, but I just think it can be harmful to people sometimes. In other words, what's to prevent the NFTO community from being like invaded by, Roman Catholics and Protestants and all the rest, and then causing all kinds of chaos?
Well, I think that well, again, one of the things that existed before we created these massive social networks is that people have rules. And will NFT have its own rules? Of course, it's going to have its own rules. We haven't got there yet. We've been building it out, only a couple of days. We've been planning it for, a couple of months. But the point is, we don't even have our terms and conditions up yet. So, and everyone's going to have to, in reality, have terms and conditions up simply because of the fact that each private community is running itself. So you have to kind of decide how you want to do that. I mean, it's called an online Orthodox community. I mean, if Roman Catholics want to join it, they can, but I assume that they're going to be respectful to the Orthodox on the groups, and otherwise they can't. Um, so I'm not going to, again, it's not like you can't have it take over because it's our community. If people try to take over, I can just mass ban them. But the point is, we can do that. But I don't even see a need for that because something like this has blocking features. So eventually people like that will find that their amusement goes away very quickly, and they just leave. Because the truth of the matter is, most of the people who come on from heterodox groups, and they want to argue with you, or they get tired of it, and they eventually want to form their own groups, and that's good. We should be encouraging them to form their own groups as opposed to using this mega corporation run by a tiny little cabal in Silicon Valley that can then just deperson whoever they want. I would rather that they're happy in their own group and I'm happy in my own group than people. We can fight sending links to each other than having Mark Zuckerberg suddenly go, I don't think either of them should exist. I mean, that's because that's where we are now. We're at an existential state on the internet. People put their whole lives on this stuff. And
Now, Mad Skills 299 says, does NFTO have a messenger?
it does, but it's still buggy, which is part of the reason why I'm suggesting using XMPP, because I've used the XMPP tech. It works really well. And it's it's actually quite nice. What's this? NFTU community. Who created this? I guess Senya did. Okay, well that's nice. So she created a kind of a group here. If you want to take a look. So the point is that people who want to, if you want to follow NFTU community or join that, and you do have XMPP, if you do,
can you embed an XMPP?
You mean like a chat function? You
Yeah.
can, but I don't know how to do that. If you take a look here, what I'm using here is this is as I said, this is. Wait, hold on.
I don't see anything.
I'm changing it right now. See, this was just created now, and this is NFT community quick group that was created. And so that's nice, But the point I'm trying to make is that as for embedding it, yeah, it can be done, but you'd have to look that up. You'd have to look up embeddable XMPP client. But the point is, whatever client you choose, you want to make sure that it's secure, and that's why they have a memo messaging. And once you have any XMPP username or address, you can just sign on, and then you just have to find, people's address and find who they, where they are. It's a little bit it's a little less easy than say using Messenger, for example, but it is it's worth the risk, because if your entire person, whether your private conversations or all the things you're writing about, church or politics or food or whatever, are simply being monetized. This is something that I want to make clear right off the bat. If the reason Facebook operates and exists the way it does and is worth so much money is because you are the product. You are being monetized, and every single thing you do on Facebook is being monetized. And this is part of the reason why we realized, it's not only are you being monetized, but you're being monetized at their mercy. When you no longer have value to them, or you don't toe the party line, you can simply be removed. And so this is something that is very, very dire, and something that.
Okay. Someone in the chat says NFTU.net is working 500 internal server error.
Yes, that is true, and that is because we are still scaling. So it's been going up and down for the past, probably the past 10 hours or so, as we're trying to figure out and scale up, because it is getting a lot of attention, a lot of hits, and we're trying to adapt to that. So we're going to be going up and down quite a bit for the next, probably for the next few days, until we've got that figured out. No social network started out without a bunch of crashes, and unfortunately, you're seeing that.
Yeah. Okay, so should we move into the apologetics section? Or
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, any have any? Well, what are we going to talk about?
Well, what we were going to talk about, it's interesting. We were talking about there were two show ideas that we basically had that we were going to discuss, and that was the way the fathers saw the scriptures in terms of whether they were, I guess you could say safe guides, or whether they can be disregarded as fables. And we were also going to talk about true orthodoxy. I feel like true orthodoxy deserves an entire episode, simply because we're going to be doing a history lesson from Greece to Russia to Romania, so on and so forth. What do you think, Father?
I think we can go through some of these objections people have to biblical inspiration. I think we should address that. First off, as far as I can tell, if you had gone to anyone who claimed to be a Christian, the vast majority, even if they were truly are Christian, if you're going to a Roman Catholic teacher, an Orthodox teacher, or any of the traditional Protestant teachers, let's say in the year 1850, okay, and you would ask them, or let's say 1800 or 1850, and you would ask them, are the biblical histories accurate? Do we believe they're true? And all of them would have said yes. All right, so everybody kind of up until the movement of biblical higher criticism that came out of Germany, which kind of infected kind of the Protestant churches, and then kind of started to branch out. Everyone held this view that the biblical history was accurate. Now, that did not mean people did not accept the concept of scribal manuscript problems, errors, etc. But that meant that when Moses was inspired to write the Pentateuch, when Joshua wrote his book, when the prophet Samuel compiled their text, his text, I think was probably 1st and 2nd Samuel to some extent, prophet Isaiah, that God did not allow, they did not just make up stuff. They did not just make up historical fables or lies. And oftentimes people point to, in the book of Judges, I think, Judges 18, I'm not sure right now, where they have where Samson, the judge Samson, is attacked. And he's attacked by a group of, the Philistines, and they want to capture Samson, all right? And it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and he picked up a jawbone from a skeleton, from like a dead donkey.
Yeah.
And he killed 1,000 Philistines. And a lot of people, like, even on the apologetics forum, there were some people from modernists who were saying, "Oh, this is ridiculous. Who can believe this?" But it says the Spirit of Samson was not a normal person. He was granted superhuman strength by God. All right.
Yeah.
It says the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he was able to do this. Now, I would say if someone came up to me and told me, "Oh, I know some guy and he killed 1,000 people with a donkey jawbone," I'd say I wouldn't believe it. But if I knew this guy was a prophet of God and he had done other miraculous things, what's the point in why not believe it? All right. Can God grant people superhuman strength, as we believe happened to Samson, to do these things? I see no reason why not. So in other words, a lot of these attempts to disbelieve the historicity of the accounts in the Old Testament are just as much founded upon modernism, the concept that miracles can't really happen, as anything else. And this is why I find it quite ironic that there are so many people who are kind of these halfway modernists, and almost like a conservative modernist, and it was an oxymoron, and they will say they believe in the miracles of the New Testament. All right, like the resurrection of our Lord, his raising, the son of the widow of Nain, Lazarus, the daughter of the ruler of the synagogue, etc. But why are those considered acceptable? But God granting superhuman strength to Samson, why is that considered ridiculous? Anyway, I would say that if you look at, let's say, the St. John of Kronstadt in his diary, yes, exactly. Gottlieb the Tsar says, "Why accept the New Testament if you don't accept the Old? It makes no sense." Because if somebody was trying to make an argument to me that, well, maybe there was a manuscript error or copyist error. Well, a copyist error doesn't negate the essential historicity of what we're writing, what we're reading. All right, that happens all the time. I mean, even if you compare all the New Testament Greek manuscripts, as I understand, they're all like 99.5% the same. All right, So, okay, so let's go through some of these objections sometimes people raise, unless there are more questions. And one is an interesting objection, and it is in the Gospel of Matthew 27:9. And St. Matthew is commenting on what happened to Judas, all right, how he basically went and he hanged himself and such. And it says in Matthew 27:9, "Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremy the prophet, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him that was valued, whom they of the children of Israel did value." Now, the issue with this is that a lot of people say you do not find that in any extant manuscript of the prophet Jeremiah. They try to say it's really found in the prophet Zechariah. However, technically, the exact quotation is not found in the prophet Zechariah. Now, St. Jerome says that he had seen manuscripts of the prophet Jeremiah that in fact had something like this in it. All right. St. Augustine, when he comments on this verse, says that St. Augustine says he had seen, New Testament manuscripts that just had the prophet said this instead of saying the prophet Jeremiah.
I think St. John Chrysostom said that the manuscripts were lost too.
Yes. So the question is, just because, for example, there could have been, and the other question is that, are we necessarily even dealing with the book of the prophet Jeremiah, or is this kind of a saying?
An oral tradition.
Exactly, an oral tradition that was preserved. For example, in the book of Jude, there's a quotation about the disputation over the body of Moses.
Exactly.
All right. Now, some people say, well, this is very similar to the kind of Old Testament apocryphal, pseudepigraphal book.
I think it's First Enoch or Second Enoch.
Jubilees or something like that. I'm not quite sure.
But it's not. It was never.
So, but the point is that we accept that quotation as accurate because it was recorded by the inspired apostle. All right. So that could be, in fact, oral traditions from the Old Testament period that were, in fact, accurate. I mean, there's no reason there couldn't be. Now, but before people would say, you're just kind of explaining this away and you're not dealing with the text. But I think that's the point to some extent. The point is that when you read the fathers, they weren't just saying, the Matthew just made a big mistake and he forgot to correct it. All right. And the Holy Ghost, let him just make this mistake. The fathers were trying to find or giving explanations as to why this, Matthew wasn't just mistaken. All right. The very fact that they were trying to explain these away in a coherent way to preserve the integrity of the scriptures as part of the tradition of the church should tell you to begin with that they accepted an understanding of inspiration of scripture that wasn't just an inspiration based upon, some selective dogmatic reading. Like, for example, there are some people who say you have to believe only those things which have a dogmatic foundation. But the problem is that Orthodox Christianity is an historical religion. You cannot accept the resurrection of Christ without believing it actually happened. You can't accept it in an abstract way. Mickey Mick says, what are unbaptized people allowed or not allowed to do in church besides refrain from taking the Eucharist?
If they're catechumens, I think they're allowed to take of the Antediluvian, aren't they?
See, there are different traditions about this. There are some teachers I know who would say that that if catechumens can't even take the Antediluvian. Okay. Now there are some who say that. So everyone could always say, well, I know. Someone can say, Roquefort back in the 1970s allowed everybody in this church to take Antediluvian even if they weren't Orthodox. And I'm sure you're going to find places like that. You know what I mean? But in the case of Antediluvian, Antediluvian was originally meant to be taken by people if they didn't take communion. So like, right. And then it kind of got to the point where everybody just took it anyway. But an unbaptized person, technically, according to the canons, if you follow the strict interpretation of the canons,
they're not even supposed to be inside the church.
A catechumen's only allowed to be up to the what's called the service, the liturgy of the word. I use that word. There's like the service of the catechumens, which is everything up to the gospel reading, basically.
Right.
And then they're supposed to leave. But that even we know from St. Augustine and other North African writers from the early 400s, there was even an allowance to allow the unbaptized, even if they weren't catechumens, to stay and listen to the sermon. All right. So they were kind of allowing that even in an early period. See, unbaptized people, they can't take communion. They can't take any sacraments. They can't go to confession. They can't receive holy unction. Obviously, they can't be given ordination. They can't be given sacramental marriage.
Basically, they can't act. They can't act as part of the church.
Now, we want them to be part of the church earnestly. So I think there's, in fact, one place where St. John Chrysostom talks about how if somebody had come to him and begged him earnestly, they wanted to receive the sacrament of baptism that very day. And if he felt they were really sincere, he would baptize them. He wouldn't make them go in, but the question is, how do you determine if someone's sincere?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times St. John Chrysostom was dealing with people who were like they were like professional catechumens for like 10 years.
Yep.
All right. And St. Cyril of Alexandria, of Jerusalem, dealt with the same persons and such. So anyway, so unbaptized people aren't allowed to take part in any of the sacraments of the church. Technically, they shouldn't be in the church unless they're in the physical building, unless they're a catechumen, but that's kind of not been followed probably for several centuries.
Okay, now, what's it called? We skipped a question. That's Sean Ridland's question. Are you going to do an entire episode on Judaizers soon? It seems to be exploding in my area in Germany.
That's the dispensationalist stuff. A lot of
it. Yeah,
a
lot, and we will. Again, a lot. Now, keep in mind, the Judaizers of past ages generally were trying to kind of incorporate Jewish
circumcision
into the
clean and unclean.
The new Judaizers really are just lost. Because they have absolutely no concept of the tradition of the church. They're grabbing at whatever tradition they can get, and
this is why you have like these messianic Jewish congregations.
Yeah,
and a lot of it, a lot of them, their theology is almost identical to that of a Southern Baptist, but they use kind of Jewish synagogue services.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
exactly, and so it's so that's something to keep in mind. So we will. Okay, well, I wasn't sure because it said Germany right after that. Sean. So
truth be told, says, how is holy water holy if it's just water? Well,
well,
it's
it's not
holy.
just water.
Yeah, it's blessed. It's blessed water.
Yeah,
So
you bless it. It's a, there's a ceremony to blessing the water, and the point is, if you believe in the power of the church to bless objects, then water can be blessed.
yes, because we believe God's grace can infuse objects.
Right. So let's take a look here. God save the Tsar as not relevant. One of my biggest issues is mixed marriage. How can one receive a sacrament without being a member of the church? Makes no sense at all.
And he's correct.
Yeah, you're not really supposed to be doing mixed marriage.
In
That's
fact,
a
the
very
canons.
recent innovation.
In fact, the canons of the ancient church, especially like the canons of Trullo, in fact, say that if an Orthodox person marries a heretic, and even if it's done by a priest, I think the marriage is considered no marriage at all. Now, the problem with this happens when you start getting into the 1600s, really, and you started having people trying to do mixed marriages, like on the Greek islands, Roman Catholics were trying to marry Orthodox women or whatever. And it was happening, and it was not supposed to be happening. And then it gets even worse in Russia and some of these cases in Western Russia. And it gets to the point where, it was being allowed, though it should not be allowed. So I don't disagree with you. If people are doing mixed marriages, that's
it's a problem, and and the problem is that especially in the ecumenical era, we have been dealing with more and more of these situations. They're almost encouraged, and basically the reason they're encouraged is to continue pushing the indifference. Ecumenism creates indifference, and so if you're pushing mixed marriages, the idea is that sure, the husband and wife may believe what they want, but those kids won't believe a thing, and that's kind of the goal. Unfortunately,
but again, there's a sacramental question. If you're having one person who's Orthodox and the other person is not Orthodox, not a part of the church, then how can the theology behind the services presupposes that, because it says the church, the mystery, because marriage is an imitation of the mystery of the of Christ and the church. All right, so none of it makes sense. So
the logic behind the mixed marriages that you see in the Pauline privilege, etc., is that both parties were not Orthodox, and one party became Orthodox after they were married.
But but that's not a mixed marriage in the sense we're talking about.
It's
that's
not.
One converting and the other being, and because exactly. That's not. That's like you said.
That's not what mixed marriage in the modern sense is. So mixed marriage from the perspective of the church historically has always been wrong.
And in fact, technically, according to the canons of Trullo, it's considered not a marriage at all.
Yeah,
it's considered invalid.
I think it would be better if people focused more on bringing their potential spouse to the church, or even more importantly, just picking someone from the church, within the church, who's got an Orthodox life and background than not. I would say it's better to, marry somebody who's not a great Orthodox versus marry somebody who's a very pious Jehovah's Witness. But you never know. That pious Jehovah's Witness can be converted. So talk to your priest. That's really what it comes down to.
But again, we don't accept mixed marriages. Just to be frank, it's not acceptable.
It's not. It's canonically.
I've never seen it. Maybe it happens, but in true Orthodoxy, I've never actually seen it.
Yeah, it's more the Pauline thing where somebody converts.
Exactly.
Let me see. Now, Clemens Hotel asks, why is all of Russia not Orthodox like long ago? Well, there was that 100 years of communism. That kind of almost 100 years, 80
70 years of really 70 years.
Then, yeah, and they did mass murder like 27 million people in the first 20 years, and they continued killing people. And then they made up the Moscow Patriarchate, which of course turned everyone away from the church.
That might have had something to do with it.
The Soviet period of the Moscow Patriarchate was tragic, and a lot of people, there were stories of priests being used as basically listeners for the KGB. Like they had radio so that they could listen in on the confessions. It used to be that people were actually afraid of confessing to the priest because they thought they'd get reported to the secret services. So the point is,
well, remember back in the 20s, you can read about the accounts from the 1920s, how there would be priests and they would bring them into the commissars, and they would say, "You're going to report whatever you hear in confession. You're going to agree to work with the NKVD, whatever was before the NKVD, or whatever in the 1920s before it was the KGB." And they said no, and they began to throw them out of windows. All right, they like have this building, like, "Oh, you're not going to do it," and they end up throwing something like 30 or 40 priests out of the window. I mean, people forget a lot of these priests just simply said no, they're not going to cooperate, and they were all killed. Something like 100,000.
Yeah,
deacons.
I mean,
priests,
there's
monks.
a reason why the New Martyrs is such a huge list.
I mean, they had killed so many people that it got to the point that by the late 1930s, by 1940, there were only two officially groups in Russia that were called in the Soviet Union that could call themselves Orthodox and had any approval by the state. One was the Living Church under Khodrovsky or whatever his name was, and the other was basically the poultry institution run by Metropolitan Sergius Strogodovsky. I can't remember his last name. All right, he had him and one other bishop. All right, and they only got rid of the Living Church had basically been created in the early 1920s, and it had been created from like groups of people that didn't like things, they didn't like the administration of Saint Tikhon, and they were renovationists, and the Soviets kind of encouraged them, and then the Ecumenical Patriarchate recognized them. That's the kind of hidden history about that. And Sergius was originally a member of the Living Church. There were other people, members of the Living Church, and then kind of the Living Church kind of dwindled over time because it allowed to have married bishops. And
it was such a renovationist organization,
exactly.
Nobody could stay with it.
Though theoretically, it was doing everything the Ecumenical Patriarchate had tried to get through at the panel of the Congress in 1923, but it couldn't. So that was why when the Soviets, when the Germans invaded the Soviet Union, what happened is massive amounts of Soviet people, soldiers, were actually surrendering. They weren't even fighting because there was so much dislike for the Soviet government. That people have this idea is that why wasn't there continuous rebellion? Well, there actually was after the World War I ended in the 1920s. Oh yeah, there was a civil war in which something like 10 or 12 million people died. And then there was massive amounts of resistance, guerrilla resistance up into the 30s. And then even if you had regular people who didn't want to take up arms against the Soviet government, they didn't necessarily like the Soviet government. All right. So
you have the Partizani, and you have to. This is one thing that people forget. Russia is a huge country.
When we say Russia back then, or the Soviet Union, it was contiguous with the Russian Empire. It was what we call Belarus, Ukraine, Russian Federation,
and all of these areas,
Central Asian areas. It was humongous.
And in many of these areas, especially.
And what was that? There was that one. I'm not defending the Old Believers. There was that one Old Believer village that was founded back in the 1840s, and it was only rediscovered in 1937 for the plane flyover. It had been almost completely isolated for like 130 years or something like that.
Yeah, and that's something that was common in Russia. You had again the Partizani were like people who basically like they lived in the outback and so on and so forth, and they just defended their territory with guns, and they were mostly left alone. So because
the Soviets wanted to control the cities, and the railroad areas, and some of the farming areas,
because they knew that that's all you needed to basically take nominal control of the country.
Exactly. I mean, if you wanted to go hide out in the mountains, you could probably do that. You might get caught or whatever, but were they really going to go after you necessarily? But my point is that so what happened is that there was all this went on, and that gets into the Sergianist history of why people eventually kind of got turned off. And now we should remember when the dissident movement began in the 1960s, kind of in the Khrushchev era and such. Even though Khrushchev had his own persecution against the church, or the Moscow Patriarchate, or against religion in general, he added against.
Yeah.
I think it was. It goes back to the 50s. After Stalin died, there was this defrosting period in which there was a de-Stalinization was happening. And Bishop Gregory Grabe, when he was only Father George Grabe back in the 50s, wrote a booklet about this. And I have a copy here somewhere. You can probably find it on the internet somewhere. And in it, it talks about this Archbishop Harmogen, who had been in prison since like 1935 or something like that. All right. And they kind of let him out like in 55. And he was like allowed to sit on the Moscow Patriarchate Synod. All right. And he was being told, well, now there's freedom and, everything's going to be all right. And, et cetera, et cetera. All right. And he began to, speak openly, and then that all ended relatively quickly. But remember, you had the Free Russian Church founded in 1990 openly.
Now, keep in mind that's what I was about to touch on.
And that was composed of not just catechumenics, but a lot of the former dissident people.
Well, one thing to keep in mind is comments will tell us, did they send Orthodox to the Gulag? Actually, many of the bishops of the Free Church and of the Catacomb Church, that's exactly where they ended up. So that's, you'll read many lives of the new martyrs, and it ends with them dying in a Gulag. So
that gets into the whole true orthodoxy episode. That's a humongous topic.
Yeah, I mean, well, we still have to answer the questions.
Yes, I know.
Now, do you consider the union of the Roe Corps and the MP to be tragic, fathers? That's
yes. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I'm gonna go with I'm not sure on that, and I'll tell you why.
Why?
It's because the Roe Corps, the MP people who looked up to the Roe Corps, were always kind of saw it as this pure thing. And then when Roe Corps united with the MP, I think that they realized that the craven nature of the hierarchy that had joined with the MP was exactly not what they envisioned from people like St. Philaret and Father Seraphim Rose. And so I think that a lot of the anti-ecumenical backlash, they like to claim credit for it, but I think a lot of them are actually kind of bitter at Roe Corps.
Okay. So you're not endorsing it from the perspective. You're just saying that it was positive only in the sense that the people in the MP who were kind of the conservatives got to see what the Roe Corps had become,
and in a sense, it
disabused them of their imagination,
and that's what's allowing them to protest against the patriarchate now, and so on and so forth.
Well, remember there was that father that on the Mount Athos, you have that Russian skeet run by that. I'm not trying to be mean, but he's run by that kind of Moscow patriarchate hieromonk who has Berestov, who has progeria is just like you're a midget and you're like a perpetual child. It's a disease actually, progeria or something like that. He actually has that. He's like 70 years old, but he can't grow a beard. He looks like he's like 8 years, like a. I'm not trying to make fun of him, but anyway, he's considered like kind of a very respected elder in the Moscow Patriarchate, and he wrote something about how the Roe Corps, to them when it joined, that they were so disappointed in what they discovered in it, that they were trying to write to Hilarion and others to get them to support the non-commemoration of, to criticize the union of the meeting of Kirill with the Pope and all this other stuff, and they got no response from them. All right, so I see what your point there. That that quickly disabused them of that. So, but we would say in the concept of
if you're asking in terms of the loss towards in a sense of the loss in terms of true orthodoxy, that's a tough one too, because I mean most of the people who were against the union had already left.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the last persons to leave was like Bishop Agafengel of Edessa,
right? And they took a lot of people with them by themselves.
Yeah. But there have been a lot of people leaving before then.
Right, because of Metropolitan Vitaly's group and people who had joined with the Roe Corps Vladimir and all the Roe Corps splits. I mean, there wasn't much left. Okay, I have a question. What was the flint lighter sound? That was probably a lighter. But in any case, let's see what else here. What else we got? What is... I think that's all the questions so far. People are very interested in the flint sound. I'm not even sure what that was, but okay.
I do have a pin here. I'm clicking back and forth. I don't know if that's causing any problems.
No idea.
Okay.
But anyway, we can still move our hands.
Opinions on Rasputin. That's an interesting question.
Oh boy.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that was Father Enoch's pen then.
Okay. See. Is that
anyway? I think so.
That's my pen. I'm sorry, I have a bad habit.
Yeah, well,
okay.
Opinion on Rasputin.
Okay. Well, there was a book written, like in the late '90s, made up of declassified Tsarist provisional government and Soviet records about Rasputin. All right, because the Tsarist secret police, the Okhrana or something like that, did in fact follow Rasputin around a whole lot, and they went to the meetings and the parties where he was having parties and such. And it turns out, for all the observations they had of him, in all the interviews, the stories about Rasputin being some sort of sexual deviant, those are totally made up. There is no truth to any of that. Now, you may, of course, find people who will say, "Oh, I heard this, and he was a terrible man," and I believe they believe that. But the Okhrana, whenever they followed him around to all these like meetings and these parties and things like that, he would be attending with the nobles or whatever. They were like watching him wherever he went, and they never found any kind of sexual deviancy that he was engaged in.
I'm not sure I totally want to defend Rasputin because part of
I'm not defending. I'm just saying that the problem is they exaggerated.
He claimed it himself, though.
No, he never claimed. Wouldn't he claim that?
From what I understood, some of the problems were that he was claiming certain things that he was doing, and it was not that there was any evidence of it. He could have just been lying. But
I'd have to see it. I'm just saying that.
And he certainly wasn't. He certainly was sympathetic to the name worshippers.
Well, again, there are people who have different ideas about that too. My point is that when you deal with Rasputin, I'm against people who want to kind of create him to be this kind of holy elder, but then again, the opposite is that he was this like evil monster.
Well, the problem is this,
all I'm saying is that the opinion I seem to be is he was kind of a peasant Russian who kind of was thought he had some sort of ability to heal the Tsar's son. That no one disputes that, actually.
Right? Yeah.
So God, now I've heard people say that he was in fact a holy man, and God did give him gifts, but that he fell into prelist. And I don't know. So, but I'm just saying a lot of the exaggerated accounts aren't actually true. That's all. Okay, you go ahead and give your opinion, Father.
Well, no, I mean, I think there's no doubt that the Tsar's son was healed. The Tsarevich was healed. There's no doubt about that. I'm not sure about Rasputin himself. I believe that if he did heal him, there was a purpose that God had for it. But at the same time, I don't know what to think. I don't want to engage in what is common, especially among people who are big fans of the monarchy and feel badly about what happened to them. They tend towards hagiography when it comes to Rasputin, and I don't want to do that either. Yeah. I think he was a controversial and complex man. I don't know where he is. I'm not going to glorify.
We always want to hope for people because they found his body, and when they found now what is true is the story that they tried to poison him and they did all this kind of that.
Yeah, and that didn't work, and they ended up having to shoot him like 10
Well,
times.
the problem is that a lot of evidence is that was a lot of that stuff was made up too.
Oh.
That supposedly they gave him enough poison to kill 20 men or 10 men. Well, it turns out he didn't eat the cakes. Well, they were trying to get him to eat. I mean, it was.
Hold on. I want to address this because this is kind of a personal sort of thing.
Okay.
We have two questions. One was, can you do a talk with Matthew Raphael Johnson on toll houses? He wrote a pretty good paper against it. God Save the Tsar says, LOL, they were key players in getting Matt Johnson kicked out of their synod. They're not having him on anytime soon. Okay. In the first place, I'm not a big fan of the term key player because of the fact that, the simple reality is somebody was going to do a plaint, and it was either going to be us or it was going to be Archbishop Joseph. There were already complaints about him. I believe both of us, if I remember correctly, offered actually to work in his defense. I know I did with Vladik. I asked that. I think you did. You might have as well. I'm not sure. But the point is, he didn't want a defense, and he began demanding stuff like the Abbey's financials. Frankly, I think that I've never seen such a clean-cut case of deposition because all the rules and protocols were followed, and in spite of perhaps the best effort to give him a fair trial, he walked into his own deposition. So
I can tell you most synods today, they don't do the required 6 or 7 bishops. They just say you're deposed.
Yeah, our synod actually went and got the bishops together to discuss this. And so, did we file the plaint? Yes. And the reason we filed them.
Can we first go? Can we go to the other questions first, and then go back to this, Father Joseph?
Sure. Okay. That's fine.
I know. Everybody wants to talk about this issue, but Sean Ridlin says, my opinion on the question: Roquefort makes the MP seem traditional to Americans, but did Roquefort absorb traditionalism from the OC or the old calendars Greeks? I think it does make the MP seem traditional, but the latter part of the question I don't think is entirely true. Because I don't think anyone's going to say St. John Maximovich was like, I don't know, some raving liberal, So I don't think it's correct to say they absorbed traditionalism, quote unquote, from the old calendar Greeks. I think you can say that there were people in the Row Corps back in the 50s and the 60s. For example, St. John Maximovich supported trying to find a communion arrangement or even making bishops for the Florinites in the late 50s.
Yeah.
All right. So if he was this like radical, person who didn't care about anything, why would he do that?
It's a lot of it is revisionist history, and I hate to say that,
because they want to say that the Row Corps only went down the path of anti-ecumenism because it got associated with fanatic Greeks or something like that.
Yeah, and the reality is, what happened is the world has gone crazy in that sense. The world had gone crazy for ecumenism. The Orthodox world, and Row Corps found itself to some degree isolated, but contacted for assistance by the old calendar Greeks. The idea that in some way Row Corps was this fanatical element kind of denies the fact that ecumenism by its nature is fanatical in its desire to end the singularity of church, the church being the body of Christ. So in any case, I would say that no, it wasn't that Row Corps changed or became more fanatical. What happened was, as ecumenists became more fanatical,
everybody changed it around them.
Yeah, so
they stayed the same for some time. The same thing with the old calendar Greeks. Their view is we're going to stay the same as we were before the calendar change.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
and the old calendar Romanians.
Exactly. What do you now? If you want to make a follow up or be more specific, we can get into that. S. Sorel says, what do you think about St. John Kronstadt predicting Vatican II masses, clown masses? That'd be interesting if you could give me the quote. That'd be actually interesting.
The only thing that I saw St. John prophecy on is that he said that basically because the Roman Catholic Church is a human institution that would collapse upon itself, which it did after Vatican II. But I don't know that he actually says clown masses anywhere.
Well, I know that J.J. Overbeck back in the 1870s was saying once papal infallibility was declared, it's only going to be a matter of time before. He says, what's going to happen if a pope wants to do services with Hindus? Or wants to, and I mean, I think
now we know.
People thought he was ridiculous. He was making a joke, but he was going to say, how are you going to resist that? CS says name worship has roots in Kabbalah. I think that's probably true. God Save the Tsar says, what do you think of old school Protestant evangelism? Knocking on doors and hanging out flyers. I don't know. That can be annoying to some people. I know.
Yeah, I think that first off, if you're
that's like the marketing technique of the Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah, I'm not. It's not that you can't do it, and that's the point. I don't think it's a particularly good technique because really, when you're talking about the church, it's not something that you can reduce to a flyer. If you want to leave a flyer at someone's door with an address for the church, that's probably a better idea. Mm-hmm. But the whole, let's have a discussion on orthodoxy. One, unless you know what you're doing, I wouldn't do it. And two, you don't know if the person behind the door is a serial killer. So I just don't see a good logical reason to do it that way.
I'm not sure how to say this. When I check the mailbox, sometimes I get flyers for community events or whatever. Yeah. I mean, that's something people can do. I mean, how do you do that? You got to contact the post office to mail things out, or
you can always do mailings and things like that. There's no reason to go to someone's door and invade their privacy.
Now, I remember when I was a Protestant, when I was a teenager, we used to do that, going to making home visits and all this other stuff.
Oh, I love when people do come there.
Well, it was just short of the type of home visits. It was just short of being the Mormon Jehovah's Witness thing, and I remember how uncomfortable a lot of people were. When we would go into their houses, because a lot of people felt, well, there's somebody from the church, I'm obliged to talk to them. And then there would be then they would follow the Protestant pastor or the minister or whatever that was appointed would try to get them to say the sinner's prayer. It would go on and on for 30 minutes. And I was like, this is not what you read in the book of Acts about how they conducted evangelism. Because if you start browbeating people or trying to put them in positions where, you're trying to close the deal, so to speak, you know what I mean by that? It can really turn people off.
Yeah.
Okay. CS random request says, can you do a talk with Matthew Raphael Johnson on toll houses? He wrote a pretty good paper against it. Let me answer this real quick, Father.
Yeah,
before you drop in. I did listen to that talk. I think I did. No, actually, I read the paper. Doesn't really answer any of the objections as you find laid out, or it doesn't really address what you find out laid, let's say, by Metropolitan Macarius Bulgakov in his Orthodox Dogmatic Theology. It doesn't address the fact that if you start reading the lives of the saints from the first millennium, they are abundant with mention of the dispute between angels and demons over souls after death. Now, what does Metropolitan Macarius Bulgakov in his 1880 book Orthodox Dogmatic Theology, what does he say the essence of the Telonia, Toll House view is? It's that after death, the soul is disputed over by angels and demons. All right, and that God's grace will preserve the souls of the righteous. Okay, that's the essence of and prayers for the departed are important during that period. It is not a conflation with purgatory to begin with. All right, actually, purgatory is a mutation of the Orthodox doctrine of what happens to souls after the particular judgment. Because technically, the Telonia or toll houses is part of the particular judgment. All right. Now, you have some sources that will say like 15, 20, 22 toll houses. As far as I understand, the church has never dogmatized any of that.
No, it doesn't say how many toll. It could be one toll house. We have no idea.
And those manifest, like, for example, I think Father Michael Pamazansky in his book Orthodox Dogmatic Theology considers a lot of that to be kind of expressions of I guess that person's. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it, but the point is that the essence is that there's a dispute between angels, guardian angels, and demons over souls after death. And you can look. You don't have to look into. Everybody kind of poo-poos Saint Macarius or the Egyptian fathers, but you can look in Anglo-Saxon and Irish saints like Saint Columba, the life of Saint Columba of Iona, which is translated and free. It was written by Saint Adomnin in the late 600s, in which he is clear that Saint Columba told him things, or there's related things from his disciples, that he saw the souls of certain monks going up to heaven and the demons attacking the souls and the angels disputing with him. He saw the soul, Saint Columba of Iona saw the soul of one man whose wife had died the year before, and as this man's soul was going up, the demons began to attack it, and then the angels in the soul of his righteous wife, who reposed the year before and was in paradise, came and by the grace of God rescued him. All right. Now, there's a lot of erroneousness about what the Telonia teaching is, and there could be some crazy folklore stuff people have. There is some of that too, I'm sure, that's not really Telonia teaching or proper. The demons can lie all they want, but their lies are not going to get through because God is not going to be fooled. All right. So the demons can say, "Oh, Gennesaret or Alexander." He murdered this person, or he did this, or he never repented for this, or whatever. And if they're lying, it's going to be no effect. All right.
Now there seems to be a little bit of a debate here on the about women covering their heads. Are women? We'll just go through it. Are women supposed to sit separate from men in church, and should they cover their heads? Yes.
Women should be standing separate from men in church.
Yeah, not sitting. And should they cover their heads outside of church? Well, we're not outside of church. I don't, because I'm noticing it's going into the question of, in between names is saying, yes, outside church too. And I don't know. You see, this is where I get a little bit nervous, because in a traditional culture, like, Father, you were in the Philippines, and there were a lot of women who had their heads covered outside of church.
Yes.
But
that's the traditional part. That was actually something they got from the Hispanic colonists.
Right, and you'll still find that tradition in many villages in Spain and things like that.
Well, Latin America, you can look at photos of rural parts of Latin America. Women have kind of like a scarf thing.
Sometimes, and that's my point, because modern things have the point I'm trying to get is, I think it's enough that a woman covers her head in church personally. Would it be nice if she covered her head outside? Sure, great. But am I going to demand that? I don't think that that's a wise idea. I think that a woman who shows enough respect for God by covering her head in church is doing a better job than 99% of women in the Western world. So I don't see why we should then, demand a cover outside. But that's just me.
All right, let's look at the what other questions do we have there, actually? Okay, so
Let's see. St. John Maximovich wasn't. It seems like he. Okay, that's
Okay, now just let me address that question. Sean Ridland says St. John Maximovich wasn't receiving RC priests by confession only like the MP does. It seems like the MP has always contained ecumenist elements like alleged Latinization in their seminaries. Now, technically, I think well, first off, the Russian Orthodox Church back in the 1700s had the policy of receiving Roman Catholic priests by what was called vesting. All right, just like if they would receive a Roman Catholic layman who had had confirmation in the Roman Catholic Church by what's called the rite of the confession of faith. All right. Now, this was not interpreted as saying that the Roman Catholic priest or the Roman Catholic layman had been part of the church or had was a priest of the church. All right, because this goes back to the concept of economy. All right, in history, have we had occasions? And now I would say you can't even do vesting anymore. I think that's impossible since 1969, technically. Because the Roman Catholic Church doesn't even have the correct form. They changed everything about their form of orders. Even before, they didn't have any grace, but the form has even been destroyed.
yeah.
So that's kind of an impossibility now. But, for example, the Seventh Ecumenical Council, a discussion was, when we were just talking about this in one of the forums, at the Seventh Ecumenical Council, one of the big problems you had to deal with was all these iconoclast bishops, priests, deacons, laity, who had rejected iconoclasm. Well, the problem is that they had all been ordained by heretics, who had been ordained by heretics, who had been ordained by heretics, who had been anathematized back in like 730. All right. And in fact, when Patriarch Paul IV was elected Patriarch of Constantinople, like in 784, he agreed to iconoclasm, but then he kind of like rejected it and he left the patriarchate. And he told the senators and the imperial government that we're in schism and heresy from the church, and that we have to get out of this. And so that's why they have the Seventh Ecumenical Council. And at the council, all the bishops who were iconoclasts had to give an Orthodox libellus, or written document or a statement of their faith. And at the council, a discussion was had about how can we receive these people? Because obviously, they're not just like, it wasn't like they had an Orthodox ordination like 30 years ago and then they left the church. They had never had an Orthodox ordination. Many of them had never had an Orthodox baptism. So they had no apostolic succession in the way the church means it. That is, they had no grace.
Yeah.
All right. They could have the laying on ceremonies, the correct rites, all that could be done. All right. So what happened is the monks at the council said that, are we really allowed to receive heretics without reordination or rebaptism? Because remember, the monastic communities of the Byzantine Empire had, by and large, not gone into iconoclasm. They, in fact, were persecuted because they refused to recognize the iconoclast heretics for 50 years. So at the council, a discussion ensued, and St. Taurisius, who is the patriarch, said, well, what about what happened to St. Meletius of Antioch? They never demanded he be reconsecrated. And so it was decided that they could sign documents affirming their Orthodox confession of faith, and they would not have to do whole new reordination rites for the bishops, the clergy, let alone baptisms or chrismations for the laity, okay? Even though they had no grace. But why could they receive them? They could receive them, why? Well, because they had the correct forms. So that can happen. So I would say that it would be incorrect to say, let's say the Russian Orthodox Church in 1840, it would be incorrect to say that it was being ecumenist when it took in 3 million units from Belarus, which happened in the 1840s and 50s, and they didn't reordain any of the priests or rebaptize or rechristmate any of their people. All right, and those people have been outside the church for like since 1597. All right, so you have to be very specific on these issues. I don't think St. John Maximovich ever said Roman Catholics had grace, or let alone said they were. I agree. He probably didn't receive them by confession, but the problem today with the Moscow Patriarchate is they're very selective in how they do these things. And what I mean by that is that, on the one hand, what makes it so ridiculous is the Moscow Patriarchate will say that they can't accept the baptisms of people in the Epiphany crazy Kievan Patriarchate group. Which, okay, I understand that if you think they're schismatics, obviously.
I really definitely want to touch on this indulgences thing because,
my point is that it's a selective thing in how everybody does it. That's all I'm getting at. So I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying it's always selective. Okay. Go ahead.
Now, because there seems to be some sort of debate going on about purgatory. I think that Scooter there, he's got that correct. That when it was discussed at Florence, basically they discussed a middle state of souls, but they didn't define the treasury of merit, so on and so forth. And then CS says the Ante-Nicene Fathers do speak often about merit. They do, but they do not speak of a treasury of merits. The concept of the treasury of the saints is something that was invented well after the schism. And no, indulgences cannot, they're not real. That's not something you find in the Ante-Nicene Fathers or in the post-Nicene Fathers. You simply don't find it. It's it's something that was created much later, and it had to do with the heavy development of and Selmian atonement theology. Effectively, at what price is what it comes down to, and everything became kind of transactional in terms of salvation. So that's kind of where that is completely different from the Orthodox understanding, of the concept of merits. The good deeds of the saints are not something that can be put in a bank. Um, so that's something to keep in mind.
Now, the definition of meritum, from which we get the word merit, means just merit, service, deserts, value, reward, benefit, kindness. All right. So, we
don't have development of doctrines. Yes,
we the bank of kindness.
Yeah, we don't have that. Orthodox, basically, we try to preserve the faith that was given to it once delivered to the saints. We don't try to build it up. And so let me see here now. Mickey Mick asks, does the convert choose his new name upon baptism, or does the priest do it for him? Yes, because either one occurs. And there are different views on.
I think the priest has to approve the name because he's going to be doing the baptism.
Well, yeah, but one thing to keep in mind, and this is something that I hate to say.
I am a priest. I have to tell them whether the name's acceptable or not.
Yeah, but now here's my point, though, is that we live in a Western context, and one of the things that drives me nuts. It's not the case, obviously, when you're a priest or a monk, you have to change your name. Usually when you're a monk, but not necessarily as a priest. But the point I'm trying to make is that when you're baptized, most people in this country have for lack of a better word, a Christian name. They don't need to change it. They can even change the saint because there's usually hundreds of saints with the same exact name.
If they're called Matthew or something like that.
Yeah, there's no reason to.
There's no need to suddenly become Vyacheslav.
But that's why a lot of people do that, and they encourage that, and that's terrible. I think that unless you really want to be Vyacheslav.
Like if your name is Patrick or your name is something like that, why become
Vladimir?
Vladimir,
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, it's a great.
Vladimir's a good name. I'm not attacking Vladimir.
It's a great name, but the point is, if you like your name Patrick, why change your name Patrick? There's no reason to do that. Mm-hmm. And so now let's continue on. Catholics didn't even believe in the development. Yeah, that's correct.
All I wanted to say, Sean, because I was talking to Sean Ridlin about this question, I agree, but all I'm saying is that what happened is that the Moscow Patriarch and ecumenists will take the let's say pre-revolutionary Russian practices, and they will try to infuse an ecumenical meaning into them that was not there, if you know what I mean, Father Joseph, back in 1840. Yeah. And so, but they do this with all kinds of stuff from church history. And that's what confuses people.
Now Mickey Mick says, I have a Muslim name, though. Well, is it an Arabic name or a Muslim name? Because there's a lot of Arabic names which are perfectly fine also. If it's like Muhammad or something, then that's, should probably be changed.
Like, I think, for example, is Abdul, isn't there a Saint Abdul or something like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of saints with, Arabic names, but in any case.
Because it has to be the name of a saint of the church.
Right. And
and there are literally tens of thousands of saints. If not, that on the books, if not more.
Muslim-ish. If it's an Arab Christian name, if it's an Arab name, there's a lot of Arab Christians. There's nothing wrong with having, a Christian.
I don't know. Should we really ask you?
He said there's Saint Ahmed. There is Saint Ahmed. And if his name's Ahmed, yeah, I say go with that. No point in changing it. Why? It's but the point is, some people do want to change their name. And if you feel called by God to do that, talk to your priest about it. You probably should. Essence and energy distinction is a development. Gnomic mode of willing is a development. Plenty of development. These are not developments. These are clarifications. The simple reality is the essence and energies, you can find the evidence of that in the scriptures. But the point is, talking about the essence of God, the operations of God, you can find in the early fathers all the way down. Um, there's a difference between changing terminology and making clarifying terminology and actually changing a doctrine. None of the
Because,
fathers
for example, you can have situations, before a major dispute arises,
yeah,
where everybody believes it, but they've just not, they've just not decided to write a 30-page paper about how to parse the phraseology. That does not mean the doctrine was suddenly invented, or it kind of went from being a nut to a sequoia tree. You know what I mean, Father?
no. You see, he's saying developments or clarifications. That's how Newman explains it. Yeah, but Newman makes a logical leap from clarifications to actual growth of doctrine, where he says that a doctrine effectively is in an incipient form and grows to a full blown form, which can appear different from something else. That's not what we're saying. If I define something and I say money and then I define it in dollars, that's not changing the meaning. But if you're saying, I say money, and then you say your house, that is a different meaning altogether.
Okay.
So no, I disagree. And then Atomic Leader says, "Hello, fathers. I'm wondering if you could do an installment on your synod's history. I've read your synod take flack for its origins with the old Catholics who had some shady connections. So an episode clarifying this matter may be good to make." Well, we're going to do an episode on the old calendar, so we'll devote at least 20 minutes to us.
Well, technically, the only people that came from the old Catholics originally in our synod would be, I don't think this, Metropolitan John was originally members of that back in the 70s.
Well,
but I'm just saying, our synod really was founded by Archbishop Exentius, by the Tomos in Italy.
I think we should clarify that because our synod has kind of, before we joined Archbishop Exentius, and Archbishop Exentius was given, he did give Eulogius the right to a Western European metropolia, which is what we discussed. But if you're talking about our personal histories and you're referring to, say, for example, the Abbey's history or William Francis Brothers, there's still a rich history in and of itself. Would it be considered part of the true Orthodox Church? No, but is it still worthwhile? And is it worth remembering these people? They a lot of what they did was kind of heroic. The Synod of Orthodox Bishops of the Western Rite, which is what you'd be referring to, kind of pioneered in the use of the services in the Western rites that we use today. Wow, sorry, dog. I guess I didn't like that.
I'm sorry, my dog heard something
outside. Wasn't a fan of that. But the point is, look, Doug. I'm just saying the services.
No, all I'm saying is that at this point, I think there are only probably 4 people alive who are part of that original group. You know what I mean, Father Joseph? So everybody, came after that. After we joined. Because basically that group, the synod, if it disbanded and we joined the Milan Synod back in 1997. Well, I shouldn't even say we, because I was even part of it.
Neither was I. But the point is that we were, when we joined, it was the Milan Synod, and and then Milan Synod, that part Europe kind of collapsed.
Disintegrated back in the
All right, so let me see here. Okay. What is so special about your synod? I just assumed you guys were Antiochian diocese or something. Well, if the Antiochians were just using the traditional ritual, we probably, and they were, not involved in ecumenism, which they're getting better at.
No, not really.
Yeah, we're not the same thing. How many faithful does the Western Rite Metropolia have in Britain? No idea. You'd probably have to ask the monastic fathers who live in Britain. They have a monastery there in Scotland. What is it, Botel Abbey?
Yes.
And then we have another priest there, and he has a parish there in England. And then let's see here. Read Vatican I. Yeah, okay. For the old calendars talk, are y'all just gonna talk about the issue or debate new calendarists? Well, no, it was mostly going to be just a discussion of history. I mean, if there's new calendarists who would like to come on and debate us, we're not going to say no. But we know what the arguments are. We've heard them before. And they're usually a smokescreen. The biggest one, it's scientific accuracy, which has been debunked because, neither calendar is scientifically accurate. And then ultimately it comes down to common prayer.
And modernism, humanism, and modernism.
And so let's see here. Has any part of the TOC proclaimed a rival patriarch or metropolitan to Constantinople or any other ancient patriarchate? Russia, technically, yes. Most TOCs, the Archbishopric of Athens, yes. Outside of that, I would say not really, because of the fact that numerically it doesn't make sense. And then on top of that, Constantinople, I mean, I think that how many people do they even have in Constantinople? Like 2,000 people?
Yeah, something, maybe 500.
Okay.
The issue is, well, first off, to even open up a church, I don't know what the requirements are to open up a church in Istanbul to begin with legally.
Yeah, I would imagine that they're probably pretty restrictive.
So, I mean, you can do that, but there aren't that many, unfortunately, people that, well, if there are any interested people who want to open up a true Orthodox church in Istanbul, they can contact us. So we'll see what we can do.
Did Newman hold that a doctrinal development of dogma did or did not have to be explicitly taught by the apostles? No, he held it did not, because it would eventually develop. Let's see here. Where is your parish in England? We have the one priest in London, and then we have our abbey in Scotland. Let's see. I think they're on our website. But speaking of valuing history, what do you think about Protestant saints?
We don't accept them.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to throw your history in the trash. But and that we don't throw our history in the trash. It's just what we were talking about just now. But we would say that the period before the Milan Synod was not considered part of the true Orthodox Church. And I think that, that these people had good intentions. C.S. Lewis, and I don't know who the other guys are. But the point is that they weren't part of the church. And so let's take a look here. Yeah, Jonathan. Okay, yeah, and even us on the new calendar know better to argue than the calendar. Yeah, it's ultimately the argument isn't even about the calendar; it's about ecumenism. And
because remember when the 1920 encyclical by Dorotheus and the other bishops under him were proclaimed, the whole calendar change was proclaimed with the purpose of ecumenism.
Yeah.
If you read the encyclical to the Churches of Christ everywhere, it was with having joint union with the Protestants and all the other groups.
Well, now, God Save the Tsar points out a very interesting point that 90% of new calendars are opposed to new calendar. Well, I think that anyone who thinks about it is usually against it.
Yeah, but that's not 95%. Like, this is what Bishop Irenaeus was bringing up earlier today. He says 98, 90, 95% of people disapprove of the approval rating of Congress. But it's always, why hasn't Congress been overturned then? Or why hasn't there been some sort of revolution?
Yeah.
So everybody can, in theory, be opposed to it, but what are they really willing to do is the question.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, there's positive signs. Again, look at Poland, It took them for, ages, but they finally...
Yeah, but again, the problem is going to be, let's say hypothetically, if the new calendar state church went to the old calendar, would that really end all the problems between the true Orthodox and the state church? I don't think so.
It would end a lot of them.
But it wouldn't end because it was always about much more than that. If they had made the change back in 1935, it probably would have prevented, because then that would have signaled the return of traditional conservatism.
And that's ultimately the point, though, Father, is that we're never going to get to a point where they shuck the calendar unless they're willing to reject ecumenism. And if they reject ecumenism, because that's what's going to come first. That's obvious. I don't see anyone in the ecumenist sees or anything like that being like, you know what, let's just go back to the old calendar for it. No, they have to reject ecumenism. And once you do that, the rationale for the calendar just disappears.
Mickey Mick says, is there a Roman Orthodox church, as in the same sense that there is an Orthodox Church of Antioch, while there are other heretics claiming the seat as well, Maronites and Syriacs? I'm not sure what he's asking. Do you understand the question?
I think the answer to that would be basically our synod, or what's left of it in Europe, because effectively the Roman Orthodox Church, when it was Orthodox and eventually went into schism, was destroyed. And this is another show that we've been planning to do. I know that God Save the Tsar, they've invited us to on the show to discuss the Hildebrand thesis, and we do want to do that as soon as we can arrange a time. They were removed. They were replaced with what would become Roman Catholicism. And so
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, not anymore, but we tried to rebuild it, and we're still going to keep trying. That's the mandate that we were given by Archbishop Maxentius. There is, I know that there are new calendar groups in Rome, but they're usually docile and respectful to the papacy, so I don't think that's going to happen.
Would Orthodox Info debate you guys, Patrick? No, I don't think Patrick.
Patrick Barnes? Why would he
yeah.
debate us? No, first off, he goes to a Serbian parish, which is old calendar anyway. So he certainly isn't going to debate us on the calendar.
I think those people they still kind of put up the old Synod and Resistance essays, and you find a lot. Pardon me?
No, go ahead.
A lot of them still kind of adhere to some extent to that, but that old Synod and Resistance idea of, but they're like kind of Cyprianites, but fighting from within. But I think, as you pointed out some years ago, Father Joseph, that first wave of fighting from within people kind of disintegrated into just accepting everything. And now what we're seeing now, let's say for the past 8 years, is the second wave of fighting from within.
Yeah, but this is a much bigger wave. So this is, I mean, I remember it was pathetic last time. This is much better. Now,
well, I think all the things like that. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
You know, we have assault rifle and scooter here, and what I'm thinking here is, because we're still they want to talk about the Hildebrand thesis and they want other questions. So I'm just wondering, do you want to see if we can just bring them on?
They want to do it.
How would you feel about that, guys? Because we've still got a little time to kill, about I'd say 40 minutes or so. So if you guys want to do it, I'd be glad to send a link. And then we can always follow it up afterwards if you want to. Wait for, because there's a delay, obviously, of a couple of seconds. And so,
what is the Porto Alegre statement?
The Porto Alegre statement. Okay, hold on. Assaulter says he's fine with that. Hold on. I'm gonna go to the dreaded Facebook. Oh wait, no, he's on the NFTU form. Let's see if that's working. Okay, and I'll just send it to him. There. Give me 1 second. And then I'll send that to Scooter on Facebook. Give me 1 sec. Okay.
Who's in between names says let's schedule it for later?
Huh?
Oh, never mind.
Schedule what for later?
I don't know. Somebody said, but Assault Rifle and God Save the Tsar said they can do it right now.
I didn't know that In Between Names was also part of God Save the Tsar. I apologize. I thought there were only 2 hosts.
Well, there are 2 people saying they can do it. So
yeah, hold on. Spam thing. Okay, hold on. I'm sending Scooter a link, and now I'm just going to go to Assault Rifle, and I'm going to just send it in NFTU community, and I'll send a link there. And, okay, so both of you should have a link. Let's see here, close this up, and we will see. And okay, who popped up first? Who's this?
That's Scooter.
Oh, hey, Scooter, how's it going? I also sent Assaulter a link on the NFT forum there, so hopefully he pops up and be able to see him too. So this is okay. So you guys wanted to ask questions about the Hildebrand thesis. Assaulter, I sent you a link on the NFT community, so just take a look there. It should be there by now, and we can wait, but. Yeah, no, you wanted to talk to us about this, and we're going to come on. We want to come on your show also as well. So, what's it called? So we can, because we can talk about this for a long time. We've done 4 episodes on it, Father?
I think so.
Give me 1 second. I'm going to try NFT community again. If you go into your chat, there, Assaulter, just give me a second.
I can send a link to Assaulter.
Okay, send the link to him because no, he sees. Okay, I see him. They're active. Give me 1 sec. I'll send it again. I'm going to just see if he sees it. Hold on. And you see it. I mean, you can send it to him too. I also want to make sure our chat function works. So, let me see here.
So could I give a quick my opinion on the Hildebrand thesis?
Sure.
So I think it's interesting. And it's undeniable that there's a radical change in the papacy in 1075 under Hildebrand, right? Hildebrand of Savona. I mean, Dictatus Papae is an insane document. That's a total departure from the ancient church, from ancient teaching, from even his predecessors who were obviously, claiming some sort of papal prerogatives. Excuse me. But with that said, I don't think it's without foundation. So I think you're right in saying that Hildebrand is maybe the first to have like the modern papacy in 1075, or at least he probably doesn't believe in infallibility, but something close to the modern papacy. But I still, when I look at like church history, I see like Pope St. Leo, I see Pope St. Gelasius, I see Pope St. Gregory kind of expanding the claims of the papacy. It is slow, it is gradual, and those guys are all slow, those are all saints, they're all still Orthodox. But I think I don't think that his claims were totally without foundation. I don't think he just came out of nowhere and started making these ridiculous claims, because otherwise it wouldn't have been accepted by the church.
Well, and that's my point, is that it wasn't accepted. Well, the claims that Hildebrand was saying were not accepted by the church. The point is that they were radical divergence. What you're referring to, at least, and we can talk about, the case of St. Leo or St. Gregory. There is a difference between. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to send him a message. Also, if you could as well.
No, there's somebody's popped up.
Oh, someone popped up. Okay, good. So then,
then they dropped.
And then they dropped. Okay.
Okay, keep talking, Father.
Yeah. So the point is, what Hildebrand was talking about was radically different, very different from what occurred in previous centuries. Because really, when you're talking about like appellate jurisdiction, or you're talking about other other aspects of the Roman See being a primatial see in the West. That's nothing compared to what was in the Dictatus Papae, and nothing. In other words, you have to read back into history to say that sort of kind of thinking of appellate jurisdiction that you find in the pre-Schism West was sufficient to make the logical leap that Hildebrand makes, because Hildebrand basically comes in arguing that these are the traditions that we inherited from Saint Peter, but nobody could find them. Which is why they had to not only resort to changing texts, but they had to resort to shutting down dioceses and causing factions throughout local churches throughout the West. If this was something that was so obvious, they wouldn't have had to go through such extreme measures.
For example, remember the Synod of Brixen. Why would that even happen? They obviously believed they could depose the Pope and elect a new Pope.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, it wasn't like everybody was like, well, he says this, so I guess we don't like it, but we got to do it.
Yeah,
I mean, there was in fact a civil war happened in Germany where Hildebrand supported the anti-king, the Saxon anti-king. I can't remember his name. Basically,
Henry IV. Yeah,
he fought against Henry IV, and it was thousands of people died over this. So
Also, hi to Assault Rifle. You made
hello.
Oh, how you guys doing?
So the question is, he could take previous examples. I mean, you might be arguing maybe he took previous texts or examples or cases,
right?
And he tried to kind of mix them all together and create
something, yeah.
And then to say, oh, well, this has always been accepted. And part of his argument was that, oh, unless you accept my supremacy over everybody in immediate jurisdiction and essential dictatorial power, that's the only way to save quote unquote, to save the church. That seems to be, but even then, most people didn't accept it because there were a lot of people who were saying, yeah, we can fix moral problems, but we don't need, the supreme dictator and supreme dictator to do that.
And not to mention the replacement of bishops and synods with parties that were favorable to Hildebrand through violence, effectively, and sometimes not through violence, but through subterfuge, like what happened in England. But the point is, it's a process that began with Hildebrand, but really finished mostly with Urban II. But by then, you're dealing with radically different bodies.
And even after the schism, what's interesting is that when they came to the kind of Synod of Diet of Worm, was it the agreement that they made with the Holy Roman Emperor back in like 1112 or 1113? After there were still people who kind of like were these kind of I hate to say proto, but they were kind of the Gallicanists or conciliarists that kind of went along with it, even though they didn't like it, but they could never be could be completely kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church because they were too powerful. So even the Hildebrandians had to make some sort of accommodation, even though they were constantly on the, you might say, the advance. So
that's part of the reason they were almost demonically motivated on the Hildebrandian side to rewrite the church in their own image.
In fact, who was the Pope before? Who was the guy? Who was the one who claimed to be Pope before Gregory VII? That was Alexander II. Supposedly Alexander II, I think, was the one who, in a sermon at St. Peter's, made these comments that he believed that the emperor did have the right to approve the election, issue the mandate. And then,
Hildebrand had him beat up or something?
Yeah, well, what happened is that it had always been tradition that the emperor can certify the election was valid and legal, all right? That was the point behind everything. That
was the two swords theory. And the point is, and that was the one that was actually held by St. Gregory and St. Leo.
And St. Pope Gelasius, too.
Yeah, so the point is, that was their theory, and this was being thrown out. So
what happens with Pope Alexander II, according to, I think, Candidus, Hugo Candidus, I can't remember his name, one of the cardinals writing in the 1080s, was after Alexander II said this in the sermon, as soon as Mass was over, Hildebrand and his people seized Alexander II and brought him to a side room. They stripped him naked, and they beat him until he told them exactly what he had said in the letter to the emperor. So, and then he put him on a kind of a restricted amount of money he could have, and all this other stuff.
Restricted his stipend and stuff like that.
So in other words,
he already had a lot of control before he was.
Basically, in fact, if you look at historians, they'll tell you since Leo IX, I think it was Leo IX, you're looking at basically Hildebrand and what's his name, the guy who caused all the problems in Constantinople. The cardinal, remember the crazy cardinal who went over there and excommunicated the patriarch and all the crazy stuff?
Humbert.
Yes. They seem to have been behind a lot of this. Because remember, Humbert was even sent into Norman England in the 1070s, I believe. And he caused so many problems that the Anglo-Normans, who after they had kicked out the Anglo-Saxon bishops, the Norman bishops would not recognize Hildebrand as the Pope.
Yeah.
In fact, that was the official policy up until the late 1090s, because they so disliked the Hildebrandians that Humbert, in fact, caused a schism between the Anglo-Norman Church and the famous.
Yeah, so there's a whole bunch there that it just reform and the investiture controversy, as they're called. Those are such nice names for them. But what it really was it was a civil war to take over the West.
So would you contend that these popes in the 8th and 9th century and into the 10th century who were steeped in the false decretals and the donation of Constantine, that they weren't proto-papal in their beliefs?
Well, first off, that was a period of the papal decline. I mean, there were I forget which bishop was it, Father, that said we can't even look to Rome anymore during this period.
Well, in the 10th century, you have Archbishop Arnulf of Reims or Orleans, who basically said that we're not going to look to Rome for any type of authority.
Because at that point, Rome had debased itself so much. So, I wouldn't say that they weren't proto-Hildebrands by any means. They were just awful. A second point to bring is that when we're talking about the donation of Constantine, which is kind of based partially upon the earlier life of Pope St. Sylvester from the 5th century or the 500s or such, are we talking about concepts of property ownership, or are we talking about actual concepts of claims for the divine right of supremacy in immediate jurisdiction? Because a lot of things you're going to look at have to do with the idea of how to explain, let's say by the year that, for example, how did the papacy get all this land it had in Italy and in other places, all right? So if you're making a claim that the Emperor Constantine gave the Pope, let's say, a bunch of land, that's actually kind of goes against the concept of the divine right of immediate jurisdiction and supremacy for the Pope, etc., because the Emperor is giving him stuff, right? So if he's giving him stuff to begin with, that's not something he has naturally.
That's a good point, and actually something that I bring up to Catholics from time to time, because they teach that the papal prerogatives are given jure divino. But in the 11th century, during the time of the schism in 1054, Rome used the donation of Constantine in defense of their supremacy, which we can assume from that even in the 11th century, this concept of jure divino supremacy had not been developed yet.
So they're claiming. Now, I should note that you can find in Byzantine canonists as late as the 12th, like I think Theodore Balsamon mentions some version of the donation of Constantine as maybe, I think he accepts some variant of it. But he doesn't interpret it to mean, I'm not defending the donation of Constantine, by the way, but he doesn't interpret it to mean the Pope has, all these divine rights given to him. All right. He was, for example, did the Emperor St. Constantine give St. Sylvester a bunch of stuff, or did he not? That was kind of the question. But I mean, the false decretals, I think the false decretals, when you're talking about them, they're really from the 840s. I don't think you can go back to the 700s. I don't think, and find any of that. I mean, then there's this argument that the false decretals were kind of invented in the Rhineland in Germany as a way to break the power of the local provincial metropolitans. That is, for example, a lot of the false decretals have these statements about a metropolitan can't depose a bishop unless he has the Pope's kind of consent to send a legate or something like that.
Before we continue, because I'm seeing a bunch of back and forth, CS, I'm just going to address this right now. This concept of emanation in the Eastern Church, which you see in this Wikipedia article, which was written by some nut job and then locked. No, we do not believe in Kabbalah. We don't believe in successive emanations and the Sephiroth, none of that. It's just the energies are the operations of God. It's really that simple. Talking about the structure of the angelic hierarchy has nothing to do with Kabbalah. And the point is, it's a made-up argument. That's what it comes down to. It is made up. Some ecumenists put it together in the 60s because they were putting together their syncretistic works, and you're basically saying it's the teaching of the Orthodox Church. You are wrong. No, Thomas don't have a working solution. Please become Orthodox. Okay.
Okay, but that's all I'm was saying about the a lot of the false decretals when they came out in the 840s. Were kind of really meant to attack the local provincial metropolitans in Germany and France.
And the point is that even these territorial things, that the concept of the donation, they're not enough to create the concept of supremacy. That you find in the Dictatus Papae, that you find in the earliest papal encyclicals by Hildebrand. So it's not enough. All it does is it provides a little bit more anachronizable historical quote-unquote evidence to claim for something like that, but none of the fathers understood it that way.
Is there some noise in the background?
Yeah, there's some noise in the background. Okay. So, in any case, let's see here. Okay, so what were we?
Well, see, it says, but the in between names says, but the papists would probably simply assert that Saint Constantine gifted the Pope with properties that were his by right, and that everyone understood that. I don't think everyone understood that. I mean, I think of the Liber Pontificalis, it states that the Emperor Saint Constantine gave the Pope Sylvester, large censers and golden chalices and things like that.
Yeah, but that's not proving anything.
Yeah, I mean that he gave that. Now, to be honest, we do know the donation of Constantine is in fact partially it's a much more exaggerated and fabricated version of the life of the acts of Pope Saint Sylvester.
Right. But we're not only dealing with a forgery, which has already been dealt with.
There's a lot of folklore and things that was put together basically sometime, let's say in the late 780s or so, maybe.
Right, but the whole point I'm trying to make is that even the forgery is not enough.
And I should mention that the donation of Constantine and I think the false decretals were not known at all in any canonical collections in Spain, in Iberia, Spain and Portugal, or the British Isles until the late England, like the 1090s.
Yep.
Right? They did not have them in their canonical collections whatsoever. Okay. All right. And even in the case of France, where, for example, there was an attempt to kind of pull a papal intervention effect on the Archbishop of Reims. They quoted the quote from Pope St. Gelasius that's attributed to Pope St. Gelasius. It could be, it could not. I'd still want to see the earliest reference where St. Gelasius makes a statement that no one can judge the first see.
Yeah.
All right. And
obviously that worked out well for Pope Vigilius.
Yeah, well, exactly. And in fact, that people forget, the bishops of the Synod of Douzy in France in like the 860s brought that up in their dispute with one of the popes, where they said, "Please do not make us resort to what the Emperor Justinian did at the Fifth Ecumenical Council," which means basically arresting the Pope and bringing him to a council to bring him to reason. I was getting to another point and I forgot about it, Father Justice. I'm sorry. Well, there's a lot of those cases.
Do either of you guys have any questions like concerning the concepts behind the Hildebrand thesis, which I hate?
Oh, my point about Gelasius, when they brought the issue of Gelasius, sent a Nemo, said it or something. I can't remember how to pronounce the Latin. Go through the Latin text. They pointed out that, saying no one can judge the first see, that has just as much an absolute meaning in their receiving it as the concept that the Apostle Paul says, children, obey your parents. All right. But if your parents tell you to do something that's, immoral, or that's against the law, or that's against, can they do that? There's not an absolute degree of obedience. So in other words, can the Pope tell you to do something that's heretical? No, they would say. Can the Pope tell you to do something that's against the ecumenical councils, the canons of the ecumenical councils? And they would say no. So, I mean, they may have developed a lot of prerogatives and all this. If you read, there was a book written by a 18th century Portuguese Roman Catholic, and he is Roman Catholic.
Theologically, yeah.
Yeah, he was kind of one of the last of the Latin, the Western kind of Latin conciliarists in Spain and Portugal. Antonio Figueroa, I think his last name was Pereiro, something like that. He brings out a lot of this, and he points out, among other things, that a lot of titles that by his time were given to the papacy, and this is far after the schism, were in fact once held by all bishops. All right, for example, people would make arguments about, well, the only reason the Pope can drink out of the fistula straw at communion is because he's the supreme pontiff. Well, at one time, all the bishops in Italy could do that. All right, or only the Pope can wear the rational vestment over his chasuble. There's a special vestment. But at one point, that was worn by all kinds of metropolitans, all right? Or that they claim he's vicar of Christ. But at one point, you could find the term vicar of Christ applied to multitudes of bishops.
Yeah, another one is that the Pope alone can have the title of Pope, but the Pope actually had the title of Pope after, like, Carthage and Alexandria.
Exactly. So, for example, when we have the early apologetics group, we were discussing this, and one of the things brought up was one of the kind of this, it's apocryphal, but it's an apocryphal epistle of Clement to James from the 3rd century. I don't think there's anything heretical in it, but it's just apocryphal. It's not correct. It's just a kind of a folklore fable for some reason. In it, you can tell what people were thinking of the time, and the Bishop of Jerusalem is called Bishop of Bishops. All right, supreme pastor and things like that. All right.
Yeah.
Now, did this mean people in the 3rd century actually believe the Bishop of Aelia Capitolina, that these were anything more than very, highly superlative terms of endearment, or did they believe they had some sort of teeth to them? It's like, for example, the Bishop of Vienna in the 500s calls the Patriarch of Jerusalem. He says he has his patriarchate by divine right, his divine primacy. Now, he may have thought. Now, I think you can argue that there were people who believed that the Pentarchy, or at least what were clearly apostolic sees, like Rome, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, had some sort of special prerogatives and powers. You might use the word powers that may have descended from apostolic times, but did that necessarily mean that they could overrule the universally agreed upon canons of the faith? I think you're talking about something entirely different. I mean, it's like talking about a constitutional republic where you got like a president who has like a lot of kind of, granted powers in the Constitution, but that doesn't mean he has dictatorial power, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah. I see in the discussion, we're talking about Jay Dyer. Why? Anyway, the point is, Thomism, the philosophy behind it, is an interesting philosophy for somebody who does not know what to believe at all. It's just basically, unfortunately, it's just philosophical meandering. That said, I'm not going to call every Thomisite stupid. The system is bad. It's not patristic. It's not based on the fathers of the church. It's not based on revelation. And whenever you detach yourself from a system, from the teachings of the Holy Fathers and revelation, then it all just falls apart. And so, okay.
Now, let me quote here from Archbishop Arnulf of Orleans, who died in 1003.
Okay.
And this is over, this interesting question in the late 10th century. He says the Church of Rome is forever to be honored in memory of Saint Peter. That's similar to Canon 3 of Sardica. And the decrees of the popes are to be duly respected, saving always the canons of Nicaea and other councils, which must remain eternally in force. For we must take good heed that neither the silence nor the constitutions of the Pope are allowed to prejudice the ancient canons of the Church. If his silence is to prevail, it follows that all laws, all the decrees of antiquity, must be suspended so long as he remains mute. But if we are to be bound by his new constitutions, where is the use of enacting laws at all, since they may be rescinded at once by the will of a single individual? Do we, then, wish to detract from the just prerogatives of Rome? By no means. But alas, how pitiable is the condition of Rome at present. The throne of the Leos and the Gregories, of Gelasius and of Innocent, is occupied by monsters of licentiousness, cruelty, and impiety. Let us pray for the conversion of our superiors. But meanwhile, let us look for advice and direction to some other quarter than Rome, where all is corrupt and justice is bartered for gold. And concerning the statement of St. Gelasius, which I was talking about earlier, Archbishop Arnulf says, if this be so, we have at least a right to demand that the Roman pontiff shall be one capable of pronouncing an indisputable judgment, whereas it is reported that, at present, Rome is given up to the most barbarous ignorance. But even supposing that the present pope were Damasus, what have we done to contravene his decree? We never attempted to decide this cause until no hope remained of our obtaining a decision from Rome. And as to holding a council without his permission, the Council of Nicaea, so specially reverenced by Rome herself, ordains that councils shall be held in each province twice every year without any mention of the authority of Rome. In short, to avoid further disputing, if the judgment of Rome be just, we will willingly accept it. But if unjust, let us obey the apostle and refuse to listen even to an angel from heaven if he should command anything contrary to the gospel. If Rome is silent, as in the present case, let us consult the laws of the church. What other course is open to us, since Rome appears to be abandoned by all aid, divine and human, and even to have abandoned herself. So even, you're talking about late 10th century French bishops, they can respect Rome a lot, and they may not want to criticize it, but when push comes to shove, that you see what they really believe about things. And in fact, I think I have another reference from. We can go through the Cadaver Synod. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's
well, it's funny. Hildebrand brought back the Cadaver Synod after it was condemned. But in any case, all right. There's a lot of talk on J.P. Farrell or J.P. Farrell.
Joseph Farrell.
Yeah, Joseph Photius Farrell. Yeah, he's got a lot of strange beliefs. And I remember ages ago when I was first debating in the early 2000s that he was an independent bishop from one of these strange Vagante groups that, I remember his AOL Instant Messenger kind of indicated the possibility of an alternative lifestyle. So I don't regard him at all, guys. It's the same thing. Like we keep on looking at secondary sources. Well, let's talk about this scholar or that scholar when we should be talking about the fathers.
No, in fact, Farrell in his book. I mean, people recommend his book, God, History, and Dialectics, and such. But I can only speak from a liturgical point of view. There are things in the text that are actually not accurate. For example, he tries to say that the concept of preparing the gifts at the offertory isn't something created by the Tridentine Rite. That's in fact not accurate. It's found in that's found in Ordo Romanus 1 from the 600s. So I mean, not everybody did that, but even that issue, he apparently didn't even do regular. I'm sorry, he didn't even do a little bit of a study on that, but he was making a pronouncement about it. So.
Yeah, well, I've heard CS says his work on Maximus is unparalleled. Though, yeah, okay, it's in St. Tikhon Seminary bookstore. Fantastic. It's you know what's a better work on Maximus? St. Maximus.
Now, I can also quote now the Synod of Verzi, which I was just quoting from Archbishop Arnulf of Reims. Again, it goes through the question of the papacy. It says, looking at the actual state of the papacy, Archbishop Arnulf says, what do we behold? Now, it should be noted, a lot of scholars believe the speech that Archbishop Arnulf gave was in fact written by Archbishop Gerbert of Reims, who became Pope Sylvester II, by the way. But anyway, the Synod, the Archbishop says, looking at the actual state of the papacy, this is in the late 10th century, what do we behold? John, that's John the 12th, called Octavian, wallowing in the sty of filthy concupiscence and conspiring against the sovereign whom he had recently crowned. Then Leo VIII, the neophyte, chased from the city by this Octavian, and that monster himself, after the commission of many murders and cruelties, dying by the hand of an assassin. That's actually referring to the deposition of John the 12th in 963, where groups of Lombard, German, and Italian bishops gathered in outside of Rome with the emperor, and they called John the 12th to account for his crime, because he was murdering people. He was like committing adultery, murdering people. Yeah. He was a crime lord kind of figure. And he was like, I'm not coming here, and I'm going to excommunicate anybody who tries to depose me. And they deposed him, and they elected Leo VIII. And then the emperor leaves, and then they kind of drive Leo VIII out. And then John the 12th is, caught in bed with another man's wife, and the man gets in a fight with him, and he kills him. And it says, and then they try to elect this deacon Benedict, but he is not accepted as canonically elected in Leo VIII. And that's the weird thing. The election of Leo VIII happened at the council that deposed John the 12th, but Leo VIII is accepted as a valid pope even by modern Roman Catholic standards. Now, they try to say that he only became the valid pope after Benedict resigned after John the 12th. All right, but technically, what canonical precedent is that he just is now the pope after somebody resigned. There was no election. Archbishop Arnold says, now we see the deacon Benedict, though freely elected by the Romans, carried away captive into the wilds of Germany by the new Caesar Otto I and his Pope Leo. Then a second Caesar, Otto II, greater in arts and arms than the first, succeeds. In his absence, Boniface, a very monster of iniquity, reeking with the blood of his predecessor, mounts the throne of Peter. True, he is expelled and condemned, but only to return again and redden his hands with the blood of the holy Bishop John the 14th. Are there indeed any bold enough to maintain that the priests of the Lord over all the world are to take their law from monsters of guilt like these men, branded with ignominy, illiterate men and ignorant alike of things human and divine? If, Holy Fathers, we be bound to weigh in the balance the lives, the morals, and the attainment of the meanest candidates for the sacerdotal office, how much more ought we to look to the fitness of him who aspires to be the Lord and Masters of all priests? Exclamation mark.
Okay, now, Timer found another weird group, so let us know what it is, and we will deal with the weird group of the week.
Okay, so I'm going to be finishing up soon. He says, Arnold says, how would it fare with us if it should happen that the man the most deficient in all these virtues, one so subject as not to be worthy of the lowest place among the priesthood, should be chosen to fill the highest place of all? What would you say of such an one when you behold him sitting upon the throne, glittering in purple and gold? Must he not be the Antichrist? So he's talking about the supposed sitting pope. Must he not be the Antichrist, sitting in the temple of God and showing himself as God? Verily, such an one lacketh both wisdom and charity. He standeth in the temple as an image, as an idol, from which, as from dead marble, you would seek counsel. But the Church of God is not subject to a wicked pope, nor even absolutely, and on all occasions, to a good one. Let us rather in our difficulties resort to our brethren of Belgium and Germany than to that city where all things are venal, where judgment and justice are bartered for gold. Let us imitate the great Church of Africa, which, in reply to the pretensions of the Roman pontiff, deemed it inconceivable that the Lord should have invested any one person with his own plenary prerogative of judicature, and yet have denied it to the great congregation of his priests assembled in council in different parts of the world. If it be true, as we are informed by common report, that there is in Rome scarcely a man acquainted with letters, without which, as it is written, one may scarcely be a doorkeeper in the house of God, with what face may he who had himself learnt nothing be set himself up for a teacher of others? In the simple priest, ignorance is bad enough, but in the high priest of Rome, in him to whom it is given to pass and review the faith, the lives, the morals, and discipline of the whole body of the priesthood, you have the universal church, ignorance is in no wise to be tolerated. Why should he not be subject in judgment to those who, though lowest in place, are his superiors in virtue and wisdom? Yea, not even he, the prince of the apostles, declined the rebuke of Paul, though his inferior in place, and saith the great Pope, St. Gregory I, the Dialogus, if a bishop be in fault, I know not anyone such who is not subject to the Holy See. But if faultless, let everyone understand that he is the equal of the Roman pontiff, and as well qualified as he to give judgment in any matter. So yeah, he held a very high view of the honor given and the prerogatives given to the Pope. But this did not, as he says, mean absolute obedience, and on all occasions, even to a good Pope, let alone to one who is pretty wicked and evil. So, to me at least, you're not getting anything like Dictatus Papae from the mentality of the French bishops in the
No, not at all.
I think kind of the biggest, it's interesting because there's always been a Gallican resistance to papal supremacy, but
we can't say that that's a Gallican resistance to papal supremacy. That's a Gallican non-understanding of papal supremacy.
That's true,
because because remember, Gallican, it applies to when you're talking about the Frenchmen. But do you know what they used to call Gallicanism? Was called by other names in the Germany. It was by the 18th century. They called it Febronianism after Febronius. But this was a view that was subsisting and that was existing widespread areas to begin with. So that's all I'm saying.
Where I see the biggest divergence from, let's say, those 7th, 8th, 9th century proto-papists and Dictatus Papae or Papae is in the temporal authority given to the Pope. So his right to depose bishops. Now that's infallible. At least I would consider it infallible, by my understanding, at least protected by the magisterium of the church. But that's totally not found anywhere in the early church. I mean, that's a complete novelty. You don't find that in any of the earlier popes.
Now we can read in Canon 3, just to talk about that. If you look in Canon 3 of Sardica, and I'm going to put the link down here in the comments, because this is actually worth mentioning in connection to that. So Canon 3 of Sardica talks about the concept of appellate jurisdiction. Now I should note that even in other parts of the West, for example, as Archbishop Arnulf is talking about, there's this whole question over, in the 420s, there was this one priest who was deposed in Africa, and he tried to get an appellate appeal to Rome. And the African bishop said, no, that's not acceptable. Well, all right. So even attempts to give for example, in Canon 3 of Sardica says, and it is necessary to add this too, that no bishop may cross from his own diocese or province into another province in which there happens to be bishops, unless he be called or invited by some of the brethren therein, lest we seem to be shutting the gates of love. And this likewise must be provided, so that if anyone among the bishops in a province should be at variance with a brother and fellow bishop, he shall not call upon any one of the bishops from another province to support his cause. If therefore any of the bishops in any dispute seem to be condemned, and considers himself not to be at fault, but that it would be a good thing to have the case reopened, if it seems right to you, let us honor the memory to the love of St. Peter the Apostle, and let the case be appealed from the judges to Julius, Bishop of Rome, so that through the bishops who are neighbors to the province in question, a new court may be held, and he be granted new examiners. But if it cannot be established that such is the case as to merit a new trial, let what has once been tried and decided be re-examined, but on the contrary, let whatever it really is so be accepted true. Well, my point is that they're giving him something, not something they assume he has. Anyway, go ahead.
Right.
Now, okay, so I'm going to answer a question quick, and then I'm going to cover Tamara Mildred's Strange Church of the Week, which in this case is, I believe it is They call themselves the Communion of Western Orthodox Churches, and it's actually kind of a tragic story. But in any case, Mickey Mick asks, what is the stance on engaging in matters like praying for the ruler of the country regardless of his religion and engaging in political brotherhood with non-Orthodox for reasons like being anti-abortion? I don't think you have to be a political brother of any sort to be against abortion, so that's not an issue. And I would say that we're called, to pray for our rulers regardless of, their stance, unless they're anti-Christian by their nature. But again, these all come from all of these teachings come from a concept where God installs the ruler, and we live in societies that are largely installed by the people. So it's kind of mob rule. So it's kind of strange in that aspect. Father, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I mean, yes, you pray for the dispute I've heard is whether you should mention the name of the ruler if he's not Orthodox. That's actually been a discussion. I know I know Saint Tikhon, I think when he was in the United States, I think he did. I'm not sure if he actually said the president of the United States or actually named the president.
Yeah.
But I've heard people say, you just pray for the ruler as opposed to, President Obama or President Trump or whatever, And the concept is God knows who the true ruler of the country is.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't name somebody who's not Orthodox in the official services of the church.
And then now, as for this group, this Communion of Western Orthodox Churches, supposedly, or basically, they're a group that they originated in France around 2007. What it was is that a lot of these kind of bishops that found themselves, isolated, or they were like of strange providence. One of them, sadly, was Bishop Vigilier, formerly of the Milan Synod. They all got together because they didn't actually have a synod or any. They were kind of just by themselves, being Vagantes at that point, and they kind of created their own little ecumenical church. So if you look at their directives, basically, it's nice that they want to do Western Rite, but then they're like, we have to follow the Gregorian calendar. Anybody who confesses the creed and believes in the body and blood of Christ can be received into Eucharistic communion. Just a lot of it's a lot of ecumenical stuff, and I think that's what I call ecumenism of desperation. And what that means is kind of like when people are kind of isolated and when their own strange beliefs, and they don't unite with the church and they don't reach out to other Orthodox Christians, they kind of want to just unite with anyone, and that's kind of a sad, desperate thing. But I mean, some of these people had they had an actual important history, but they kind of tossed it away because they wanted to be ecumenists, and now they formed their weird little ecumenist church.
And is that the group that's got the Orthodox Church of the Gauls part of them or something?
Yeah, I think
they're originally from a Monophysite group.
Yeah, and they were kicked out of the Monophysites, and I think even Mulroon for a short period, Mulroon Dowling, who had that independent Celtic church. I think the last year of his life, he was part of them.
He was dying of cancer that last year.
Yeah, but he was also still married. So the point is, they were accepting anyone.
Yeah.
And so it's just.
And he did some interesting work, but he never really wanted to go much further. So
ironically, Joseph P. Farrell was part of his quote unquote.
It's a whole mess. I'm not trying to talk about people, but I actually felt bad for Maroon. I mean, I did. So.
Yeah, I did too. I thought he was one of the smartest men I had ever met. Now that man was actually intelligent.
Well, the problem is that he made a lot of bad decisions. And
he kind of backed himself into a corner. And so let me think here.
Ema Mildred says they call themselves semi-monophysites.
Yeah, well,
that's like being semi-pregnant, right?
They don't accept us.
Yeah. So I mean, semi-monophysite, it's like being semi-heretical. I mean, or semi-pregnant, So okay, I didn't mean to cut off either God Save the Tsar Assaulter Rifle, who was talking before I started mentioning the Council Sergeant.
Scooter Assaulter, you guys are here. Ask away. We've got a few minutes left yet.
I'm done talking.
So the view put out by Vladimir Moss about the fall of Rome be kind of similar to the Hildebrand thesis, or no?
I would say. Go ahead.
I've read his book on the fall of Anglo-Saxon Orthodoxy and stuff, and when he talks about Rome, it seems very similar to the Hildebrand thesis, but more like Hildebrand's almost like the summit of the pride of Rome and stuff. He's their both punishment and final outcome.
Well, I think that the problem is that, and again, not to discount the work that Vladimir Moss does, because he does great work. He's done fantastic work on the history of the church. But when it comes right down to it, in terms of study how each European, like Western European country, kind of like what happened between them, he seems to kind of like focus on Orthodox England and then drop off. Like it's not that I don't think that he was disinterested in them, but the amount of work it took just to get his work on Orthodox England, I think, made it a little more myopic. So he's still looking from that kind of that whole estrangement lens, but he doesn't like do an overall survey of how Europe collapsed or anything like that.
An important point to mention, I'm sorry I said I wasn't going to talk, is who had the claim to be, quote unquote, the valid pope even before the schism, from let's say 1020 to 1054. Because if you look at the different papal elections during that period, there was always like some kind of battle or fight, and there would be like 2 or 3 people claiming to be pope. So,
and that was kind of what Hildebrand used that as a weapon. He actually would, because the whole part of the whole restoring the glory of the papacy was his contemporary issue of the fact that popes constantly had contested elections. There was, infighting the different families and parties and so on and so forth. And so he wanted to present this original purity, almost like Martin Luther.
I mean, remember you had this during the time of the late 1060s or 1050s, during the time of Nicholas II. I can't remember which one. You had this what's called a so-called anti-pope, quote unquote, elected, and his name was called Cadalus of Parma. He was called Honorius II, and he was considered to be kind of part of the pro-Byzantine party. All right, and his view was that we've messed something's been. We see the problem with a lot of this stuff. Either a lot of these texts about what these people wrote have not been translated, they've been destroyed, and we're having to piece things together. Now, a lot of it's not been translated. In the case of so-called anti-pope Honorius II, or Cadalus, he was attacked by Peter Damian, but they kind of attacked him for being, disobedient, I guess. They never really accused him of being like immoral. The problem with the Hildebrandians is when they would accuse people of being immoral, it would be for just insane. For example, if you disobeyed the Pope, you'd be immoral. All right, if you disobeyed, Leo IX or Nicholas II. They expanded the definition of simony so widely that let's say if I was a duke and I gave let's say a Scooter, like you were a priest, and I said, here, I'm gonna build a church for you. I'm gonna give it to you. I'm gonna sign the property over to you. You and the community can have it. That's a good work. I'm going to give it to you. That would be considered simony. All right, even if you just gave a building to somebody. All right, and you didn't require anything back.
Right. So it had a very broad definition.
And in fact, it caused so many problems that in the time of Nicholas II, so-called Nicholas II, 1059 or so, he was going to put out a decree saying that all simoniac people who were simoniac priests were like automatically deposed. All their sacraments were invalid completely, and he was just persuaded by even the kind of Hildebrand to say not to do that because they realized that they had defined simony so broadly that there would be no one left who could claim from their perspective to be a valid priest. I think what happened with the Cadalus of Parma or Honorius II was he lasted up into I think he died like I'm vague, maybe around 1080 or something like that. And who was the guy who was like the Pope, so-called Pope, who was like Pope, counter Pope Clement III, his secular name.
Wibert of Ravenna.
Yeah, Wibert of Ravenna was basically loyal to him. And then, after what happened, Cadalus dies, there's really no one else claiming. There have been this Benedict IX, who was like a third so-called anti-pope, a third claim of the papacy around during the time of Cadalus, as well as the other guy officially recognized.
Yeah, it's unfair to call these people anti-popes because
I know.
the concept was developed to.
In fact, the Anglo-Saxon, like Archbishop Stigand of Canterbury. For example, when he took the pallium, he received it from Benedict IX, or Benedict X. I'm sorry, Benedict X, who was supposedly not to be either recognized as a pope or whatever, So a lot of these people. Anyway, I have to. I'll be right back in 5 minutes. So everybody talk.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's see here. Okay, what happened? Okay, someone disappeared. Okay, hold on. Who's here?
Scooter had to leave.
Okay, Scooter left. Okay, I didn't realize that he had to go. But okay, so did you have questions about this, or?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's better than just like having like the Romanidian view, like ever since like the 5th century, like the West is pretty much evil and stuff, and they're like almost like downplaying their orthodoxy the whole time.
Yeah, and it's unfair. It's what it is. Is it really it deprives us of a great deal of knowledge on tradition, a great deal of a great deal of spiritual nourishment from the fathers even of that time. So I think it's unfair. The renovationism, I think, unfortunately affects. I think that it gives a skewed view of the West and doesn't allow us to see our legitimate Western patrimony. Okay, Scooter, I see he left a message saying he has to run. No problem. Thank you for being on. And yeah, so in any case, you had asked a question about communion, I think, earlier between Antioch and Jerusalem with Rome.
Yeah, we were talking about the old calendars issue, and he said like pretty much like during like the time of the Great Schism, Antioch and Jerusalem continued to be in communion with Rome for about 100 years after the Great Schism. So according to like our old calendars ecclesiology, wouldn't they be heretics as well?
Well, it's there was I forget which book it was that was written on that that dealt with the how Antioch and Jerusalem viewed Rome during that period, but a lot of it came from distance. So it's not exactly a perfect parallel to the situation that we have now, because a lot of the times, if you look at some of the messages from like the Patriarch of Antioch at the time, it'd be like, well, we've always been in communion with Rome, so we don't know what's going on, but we still recognize them. So they really had no clue until the Crusades what was happening. And so there was kind of a more of a confused state of knowledge that you find among a lot of the people in the East when it came to what was happening in Rome. And you find this even among, in Constantinople. There was the debate between whether they should recognize Clement or they should recognize Urban, so on and so forth. So there was not it was not as simple as they just stopped recognizing that they just kept recognizing the Pope.
Well, technically, remember, I don't think Constantinople had a policy, I think, since 1014, where they had not had the Pope on the diptychs, even though they technically hadn't broken communion with everyone. Mm-hmm. And that was the question. Is even after now the question is, why did they break? What was now? Some people say that the reason I think it was Pope Sergius or something like that, the second, or Christopher, I can't remember, was because supposedly they had inserted the filioque into the creed in 1014. Now, I'd be interested in seeing a primary source that actually says that's the reason. I know a lot of secondary people speculate that's what happened.
Yeah, and it was popularized by Romanitas.
Yes, so I mean, that'd be interesting to know if that's actually what happened. But the point is that, let's say, even if they wanted to restore communion after that, which I think they probably did, who would they negotiate with in the period after that Pope died into the time of, let's say, 1054? All right? I mean,
yeah.
Basically, the question becomes then, because he's talking about the period of about 100 years after the after 1054, that because Antioch and Jerusalem to some degree didn't want to take part in the kind of disputes.
Well, in the case of that, the case of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, when the Crusaders took the city, he was initially the Patriarch of Antioch was initially in friendly terms when they took Antioch, because remember when like the Crusaders were like getting ready to lay siege to Antioch, the Muslims took the Patriarch of Antioch and like tied him on the battlements, like to mock the Crusaders, and that made the Crusaders really upset, because they, they're in their simple way of thinking, a lot of the peasants thought, well, this is still the Christian Patriarch, and they didn't. I don't know how they perceived what was happening as the Great Schism. And initially there was relatively good relations with the Crusaders, but it kind of went bad within a few months, especially when they began to demand that the Patriarch of Antioch submit to the papacy. I think there was even some sort of demand that he needed to use unleavened bread or something like that, and they just drove him out of the city. Yeah. All right, and the Patriarch of Antioch had to live from like 1100 until like 1200 in Constantinople, and that's where he had anyway. And in the case of Jerusalem, I think that something similar happened. And what really made the Crusaders upset was after they took Jerusalem and installed their own Crusader Patriarch, the Holy Fire didn't come down. And that's when they began to say, oh, this is some big fraud, because the Holy Fire, it would come down to us, if it would come down to anybody, So now what is true is you will find questions in the late 1100s where somebody would ask, what happened? Like there would be some bishop in the Balkans, Orthodox bishop, and there might be Latin people showing up to his church, and the view is what should be done with them. All right, and but by the time you get into the late 1100s, the realization is that we're not, had been for at least for some decades at the very least, that we're not really dealing with Orthodox people anymore. And I think it was a correct observation. Now, what is true is that Saint Theophylact, who was the Archbishop of Ohrid, and Ohrid was an autocephalous church. He wasn't called the Patriarch, but he was an autocephalous Archbishop. He does write works against the Papists, and one of the things he says is that when we are attacking the Papists, the Latins, we should be very specific about what we do. That what are the key issues that cause them to separate from the church? Well, the filioque and papal supremacy. And then he adds other issues, for example, like clerical celibacy and unleavened bread. Okay, so those are kind of the 4 issues. All right. And St. Theophylact says all these other matters about, for example, whether you can make vestments out of silk or not, whether the bishop is allowed to have a ring or something like that. St. Theophylact thought these were kind of laughable. He thought that's really are customary differences. They're not fundamental dogmatic and canonical differences. So he didn't make a big point of those. And ecumenists today will try to say, oh, look how ecumenical St. Theophylact. Well, they're totally misunderstanding him, because he was still attacking the Roman Catholics as heretics for having the filioque and papal supremacy to begin with. He's just saying that now I should note today that a lot of Orthodox do have silk investments, so that's actually turned, and it's no longer a big issue apparently anymore. So I mean, oftentimes when people start talking about, look at the early ecumenical relations in the 1100s, I mean, if you're just talking about a case where Patriarch Constantinople says, well, if Rome will renounce the filioque, if they renounce papal supremacy and unleavened bread and forced clerical celibacy, will restore communion with them. All right, as if somehow that's an ecumenical endeavor to do that. It's really a misunderstanding of trying to bring people back into the church, as it was, kind of status quo antebellum, but without the problems that led to the bellum part that would happen and such.
So we have two last questions. Can you do a full episode on the history and fall of the Byzantine Empire? Sure. Not that we have a few episodes we've already planned out.
Now, it's interesting you mention about that, talking about this whole issue of the papacy, is when the discussions began to happen in the 439, like kind of the pre-Council of Florence or Fiera Florence discussions. There were 2 delegations into Constantinople. All right, one was from I think Eugene IV, I guess, who was like the guy who ran Florence, Council of Florence, right? Mm-hmm. But the other was from like the so-called anti-pope Martin or something up in Constance. Yeah, and so you had basically the Gallicanists send the delegation. Conciliarists, and then you had the Ultramontanists essentially send a delegation. All right, and what happened? The emperor chose, unfortunately, the Ultramontanists. And I think he did it for political reasons, because he thought, well, Vienna, the Italian city-states have this big, powerful navy. They have the banking power. They're going to, because, the King of France may be a conciliarist, but what are you going to get from, what he doesn't have a lot of money in terms of banking. He may have a lot of land, but what else is he going to be able to give? And if you have to think about it, if they had went to Constance, if they had chosen the better of the 2 options, you've already solved the issue at Constance, where they're already going to say an ecumenical council superior to a pope, and they're already going to claim the pope has limitations on his authority and on his powers and things. So you've already kind of won part of the battle there. Now maybe they wouldn't have effected an Orthodox union with them in a proper Orthodox way, but who do you have a better chance with? Conciliarists, medieval conciliarists, or medieval Ultramontanists?
Yeah, but if their Christology is messed up, and this is,
I agree with that, but I'm just saying that. But you look at how the unfortunately the political leadership in the Byzantine Empire thought about these matters. They
were always cagey and always thought in terms of who has the most money or soldiers, and that's always why they chose Rome.
I'm not saying it would have affected anything, but in fact, I think Ostromov talks about this in his book.
Yeah, he does.
That unfortunately this was kind of the path that they chose to follow, and Byzantine Empire,
fell for it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Mickey Mick asked, did Francis of Assisi suffer from prelust?
Yes.
I'd say who didn't at that point.
I mean, he was claiming stuff like God had told him he was one of the predestined elect from all eternity, and he was assured of salvation.
So
I mean,
there was all sorts of craziness that came out of where Francis's time in his life in that period. He was emblematic of the period and the region, unfortunately. Okay. I think we've been going 2 hours 15 minutes just about, and I want to thank both Scooter and Assaulter yourself here for being on the show. I hope we answered questions. I think I did. Did you? Were there any other questions you wanted to talk about?
I guess only like one last one.
All right.
Well, after the Donatists and Novatianists or other heretics and schismatics basically renounce their beliefs and try and join the church, are they rebaptized again or not? Because Scooter's asking if the Catholic Church basically renounced all their heresies, wanted to join. Will they all be rebaptized, or basically economia and just chrismation, or even just a revestments or something like that? How would that happen?
You're asking about the Donatists themselves, or
he's asking hypothetically if the Roman Catholics were to renounce, let's say the majority of the Roman Catholics were to say, we renounce our false beliefs and want to become really true Orthodox.
What happened in the past and what would happen now? For the
Well, remember, there have certain conditions have to be met before you accept the form of a baptism, you accept the form of a chrismation, you accept the form of ordination.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And the case of my opinion, and I think is that basically since the 1960s is virtually impossible at this point, as a rule, to accept Latin Roman Catholic forms of ordinations. Because if you look at their ordinal change, and I think Archbishop Leonti of Chile, there's this paper written about the Rocor and the ecumenical movement, and when his father Andre Saros quotes Archbishop Leonti of Chile back in the 60s, where he says that we can't really do this with the Roman, we can't really accept Roman Catholic Latins anything more than chrismation. We should do baptism and chrismation because they've changed their own liturgy, they've changed their own ordination services to such an extent that the church does not recognize them. Because you could have looked at, let's say, the Pontificale Romanum from 1950, and textual-wise, it would have been similar to what St. Gregory the Great used. Now, there would have been other differences, obviously, like the theology of the Roman Catholic Church. But
we're just talking about the economy in terms.
I think you'd have to baptize all these people. That's just how far I'm going to say, because when you're dealing with the Donatists, the Monophysites, these other, even when you dealt with most of the Arians, they all baptized exactly like the Orthodox baptized. All right.
Yeah.
They all did chrismation like the church did. They all did these services like the church did. You had something to work with. In the case of the Novus Ordo Roman Papism, you're dealing with something that was just made up in the late 1960s, and that kind of was this. It's the culmination of the papal innovationism. So that's my opinion. I don't know if you would agree, Father Joseph, or disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I would largely agree. I think there is a theoretical. It's a theoretical question, and if you're theoretically talking about the reception of hundreds of thousands of people, I mean, could it be done in a way other than baptism? Well, if you have proof that they've got some sort of baptism, in theory, it all depends on what the receiving bishops would decide upon. Could it be done through, a mass chrismation with a promise never to do these kind of faulty baptisms again? I don't know. I'm not a bishop, and I'm certainly not a synod of bishops. I just have no idea. But realistically, will that happen? No. I think that's my opinion.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right. Well, in that case, I'd like to thank you for being on. I'd like to thank everyone on the show for listening. Everyone have a great night. And God willing, we'll see you again soon. Father, benedicite.
Benedicite.